Hello guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another Blazing Naruto what if. What if Naruto own father abandoned him to die only for him to return as the king of the hidden realms and master of Chakra? If you enjoy this video then please like, share and do comment and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. So let us start the story.
October 10, 1981. Department of Mysteries, London, England. What do you think you're doing? The sudden question cut through the silent atmosphere between the only two people in the room. The man who asked the question looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with mocha skin and dark chestnut hair that was almost black. By his tone it was obvious that he already knew the answer to his own question. The blonde-haired woman he was addressing continued working, giving no inclination that she'd even heard him. The chances of your experiment working are slim to none. Due to the complex natures of rituals, they only have a 76.4 success rate, and that's when all requirements such as rune placement, artifacts needed, what time of year is necessary and whatever other influencing factors are known. You're flying completely blind. You don't know any of those. You're working on a theoretical ritual, with hypothetical factors, based on the possibility that something we have no proof of exists. That caused the woman to pause in her work. But only for a moment before she steeled her resolve and determinedly ignored his presence once again. Anesh Balin sighed before trying once again to get his subordinate to see reason. Diana, think about the baby. You're due in a few weeks and you need rest. Go home. The experiment can wait until you get back from your maternity leave. Once again Diana Lovegood paused in her actions. Anesh took this as a good sign and hoped that one of his best unspeakables would give up for now, for the baby's sake at least. But once again she stubbornly picked up her equipment and continued drawing out runes. I'm sorry Anesh, but now is the best time to do it. My husband told me that magic levels were particularly high and agitated today. Those conditions would heighten the chance of success by a large amount. Diana Lovegood's husband was well known to the magical public at large as someone who wasn't quite all there. He ran the magical equivalent of a Muggle, non-magical, tabloid. His articles were always far out and implausible for the majority of witches and wizards. But what most didn't know was that all his articles had a basis of truth. You see, Xenophilius Lovegood had a special ability. He could sense magic. He could feel where magic pooled and concentrated, when magic flowed smoothly and steadily or jerkily and restlessly. But since he didn't know why magic acted the way it did in certain areas, situations, he made up his own theories and printed them up as truth in his paper, The Quibbler. For example, when he and his wife were honeymooning in France and he noticed the fact that magic seemed to gather in a certain house nearby in the town, he assumed that some creatures, which he named as Thurks, were attracted to the yellow-green color of the house and made their home in their basement, where the magic was most concentrated. And since the magic was more active and lively after a thunderstorm, obviously their mating season occurred only after violent thunderstorms. In simpler terms, when Mr. Lovegood heard hooves, he thought of Pegasus instead of horses. Due to his rare ability, and the fact that no one would believe him anyway, Xenophilius was the only one outside of the department who had any idea about what happened within the Department of Mysteries. In fact, if Anesh had his way then Xenophilius would have already been an unspeakable. His ability coupled with his wife's amazing mind that could make sense of the most complicated problems, even if said mind understands things in such roundabout ways and with such large leaps in logic that no one else could possibly hope to keep up, and Anesh could bet that most of the mysteries they study would be explained and or solved by the time those two retired. Unfortunately, Xenophilius loved his paper and would never willingly give it up. I seriously doubt that today will be the only day that the magic levels necessary for your experiment will occur. Don't make me suspend you and go home. The director of the Space-Time Continuum Division tried to reason. Can't you see that I have to do it today? It could be years before the wild magic is at the right levels again and I can't wait that long. My baby is due soon and I need to know that I've done everything in my power to ensure she has a happy and peaceful life. You know that the Dark Lord is targeting unspeakables to learn of and gain more power. And Zeno was always a target because of his paper. I need to do everything to ensure my baby will be safe. Anesh knew that Diana would not cede on this matter. And if truth be told he was dying to see if her experiment worked as well. Manually he shut and bolted the door, ensuring that the experiment wouldn't be disturbed and that no other magic than that in the room would mix in with the ritual. Tell me how I can be of assistance. October 10th. Konoha. Duck. Those lucky enough to react managed to avoid the falling concrete which used to belong to the apartment complex right beside them. Those who weren't fast enough added to mortality rate which has been exponentially increasing since Kyuubi, the nine-tailed demon fox, had first began attacking the hidden village. No one knew why Kyuubi had began attacking, just that it's been a 24/7 massacre since then. The Hokage was quick to usher all civilians as far from the fight as possible at the first sign of the fox's approach and direct all those willing to fight against the nine-tailed demon. Though the majority of the Konoha shinobi were confronting the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the Takahashi clan was not. The reason was because they were busy doing a little-known ritual. The Takahashi clan was a fairly small clan, and were only known to be average ninja. Generally they lacked in the physical energies and strength compared to others, and therefore had weak taijutsu skills, but excelled in spiritual energies and therefore were usually above average in genjutsu and ninjutsu. That is, if they trained hard enough, which they usually didn't. What the Takahashi clan was really known for was their minds. They loved to read and debate about everything. Therefore those of the Takahashi clan were known to be highly intelligent, open-minded and curious. It's been said that there has always been a Takahashi as one of the Hokage's advisors and as a member of the council since the founding of Konoha. Because of their love of lore, they had many legendary jutsus. Not legendary because of their power or skill, but because it was all based on hypothetical work and legends and haven't ever been tested before. Currently, they were trying one such jutsu which, if worked properly, would contact another world. The Takahashis were a practical family. They knew realistically the village had next to no chance against the king of the Biju. Even with over 90 of the force of the most powerful hidden village, they were lucky that they had managed to hold off the Kyuubi for the 2.5 hours that they had. Therefore when news of the fox's approach reached them, they knew that they would be of more use using their brains than joining the fight. They knew that they would do no good against the Kyuubi, but hopefully another world could supply the power and or resources necessary to stop the nine-tailed demon from completely destroying the village. With those thoughts in mind, the Takahashis used every bit of their power to ensure that their summons succeeded. The nature of magic, chakra, is a mystery, even to those blessed enough to wield it. Is it essentially good, evil, or is it just pure power that depends on the user's intentions to categorize it as good or bad, light or dark? The answer lies in all of the above. Within a person, power is amoral, dependent on the user to give it shape whether to do good or bad. But in nature, where magic, chakra, pulls to an unimaginable degree, it develops a life of its own, literally. It gains its own personality and traits, creating an area where all that enter are given a sense of calm and contentment, or it can become a violent and wild storm. An example is the Hogwarts castle, which developed a motherly but mischievous personality, always watching for the well-being of her occupants yet not above playing with them by switching around rooms and stairs. It was the wild, powerful magic, chakra, that responded to Diana Lovegood's ritual and the Takahashi clan's jutsu. Both powers, for whatever reason, decided to help the rituals along. They created a link between the worlds, which would only be temporary. To ensure that the link would last for much longer, one person from each world would be chosen to maintain the link. Now they just had to find candidates. Hokage-sama, Hokage-sama, we are losing many men and we won't last much longer. Already the demon has demolished the southeast quadrant of the village. We need you. Minato Namikaze, the village of the Hidden Leaves' fourth Hokage, looked to the Enbu member currently speaking to him. He knew that the fellow ninja spoke the truth. There was no way that they could really hope to beat the demon intent on destroying their home. But that wouldn't stop the Konoha shinobi from trying. He knew that he should have already been on the battlefield, but he had very good reasons for not being there yet. First off, due to the stress on Kyuubi's attack, his wife had gone into labor prematurely. Though his baby boy survived the encounter with no health issues, besides being a little underweight, his precious Kushina died. And though Minato would love to fight the one responsible for bringing about his wife's death, without a feasible plan to defeat the demon he could not avenge his wife. With Kushina already dead, the least he could for his son was ensure the demon was defeated so he could live. Looking back to his precious newborn son, the Yondaime responded to the Anbu. I finally have a plan. Please find the Sandame and bring him to me as quickly as possible. With a quick bow the Anbu left with all haste, hope blossoming into his heart with the knowledge that his leader had a plan to defeat the Kyuubi. Minato mentally went over his plan one more time. He had been working on a seal that would send an enemy to the land of the dead, but at the cost of his own life as well, just in case he found himself in an impossible-to-win situation. He had still been trying to fine-tune it so he wouldn't have to sacrifice himself as well, when news of the Kyuubi's approach reached him. Since then he'd been working tirelessly to adapt his newest jutsu to work for a demon. He had finally worked out the specifics but was still hesitant to go through with it even though he knew he had no other choice. And up above the wild Chakra watched and chose the one who would be bound with the other world. The one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those that have thrice defied him. Born as the seventh month dies. The Dark Lord Voldemort was once again musing on the first half of the prophecy which had been spoken almost 2 years ago. He had already determined that there were only 2 possibilities for who the prophecy spoke of. Either Neville Longbottom or Harry Potter. But which one? Neville Longbottom was the only son of the Auror Frank Longbottom and the healer Alice Longbottom. Both parents were well known as competent and gifted within their personal fields and are both from powerful pureblood families and are close to Dumbledore. Frank had been head boy and Alice had been a prefect and one of the top of her class. On the other hand there was Harry Potter, only son of Auror James Potter and newly instated Charms mistress Lily Potter. Though James was not as well known within the Auror community as Frank, he was also a newer recruit and still showed great potential. He was also good enough at transfiguration to apply for a mastery, and if his last encounter with the messy-haired Auror was anything to go by, Voldemort strongly suspected the Potter heir of being an illegal stag animagus. And he's also from a powerful pureblood family. Lily Potter, even though she is a Muggle-born, is arguably the most powerful of the 4 parents and one of the youngest ever to achieve a mastery in charms. It was also reputed that the Department of Mysteries is interested in hiring her. James had been a head boy and Lily had been a head girl. So which to go after? The pureblood or the half-blood? The one born July 30th or July 31st? Longbottom or Potter? Almost as if it were a sign from above, the answer came to him through the great wooden doors. Voldemort watched as Avery and McNair made their way to his throne dragging a trembling bound man behind them. When they reached him, they sank to their knees and awaited the Dark Lord's recognition. "Why are you not with the others eliminating the McKinnons as I had commanded you? I should hope the answer is to my liking or you shall deeply regret it." My lord, the McKinnons were subdued when we left. Rosier commanded that we bring you this blood traitor which we had found in the area. We believe that he is one of the members of Dumbledore's order. Voldemort didn't recognize the sniveling man before him, but he might as well make a quick scan of the man's mind before killing him. What the Dark Lord found was most encouraging. Not only was this man a part of the Order, he was good friends with the Potters and was more than willing to sell them out with the rest of the light to save himself. Voldemort felt a cruel smile blossom on his face. "Tell me, Peter, why should I spare an enemy of Lord Voldemort? What are you willing to do to stay alive?" From above Magic watched as Peter Pettigrew revealed all he knew, including the location of the Potter's lastest safe house, to the Dark Lord. It looked like the other candidate was found. Minato studied his son curiously. Only a few moments ago he had felt a huge surge of chakra centered on his baby boy, but no matter how hard he tried to sense it, he could not find anything that was amiss. His contemplations were interrupted by his predecessor. "You asked to see me, Minato?" "Yes. As you know, I had just completed the Shiki Fujin Jutsu. I altered it a bit and I think I'll be able to use it to stop the Kyuubi. Unfortunately, the consequences for using it are quite dire, and I want to make sure someone knows my last wishes. You have my word, not only as a citizen of Konoha honoring the last requests of its Hokage, but as a friend who deeply respects you." The Yondaime let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The original version of the Shiki Fujin Jutsu is not strong enough to take demon with me from the mortal realm. So I had to improvise. In exchange for my life, the Kyuubi will be sealed away. In my son. The Sandame looked at his successor in shock. "You can't be serious. That is too big a burden for a baby. Surely something else can be used. I had heard that Suna had trapped the one-tailed demon within a statue." Yes, but that was just the one-tailed demon, and it was in a specialized chakra-infused statue that was made for the sole purpose of holding a demon. We are dealing with the nine-tailed, the king of the Biju. Unfortunately, nothing inanimate will be able to hold the Kyuubi, and if it were sealed within anything besides a newborn, their chakra pools and coils could never hope to adapt to the poisonous chakra of a demon. My son is the only one in the village who is but a few hours old, and therefore is the only one who has a chakra system that can hope to cope with the Kyuubi. Quote, but even if the boy is the only one with a chakra system that isn't completely formed, there is only so much the chakra pools and coils can be stretched. If he doesn't have the potential for a very large chakra system of his own, he will be overwhelmed by the Kyuubi and die even before the sealing was complete. The Yondaime forcefully pushed away the knowledge that his son might not survive the sealing. Even though he knew the Sandaime spoke the truth, there wasn't anything he could do about it. There were no other options, even though there were plenty of babies due to the sudden peace after the Iwa War. All of them were at least a month old, too old for the sealing. And they couldn't wait until one of the pregnant mothers gave birth, since the village would be destroyed by then. Even if there was another newborn baby, Minato doubted it would have the same chakra potential as his son. As much as he hated to do it, it was either he go through with the sealing, making his son into a Jurichin and an orphan, or he let his baby die with the rest of the village fighting fruitlessly against the demon. Minato, at least let me take your place. I'm an old man and my children are fully grown. Konoha still needs you as its Hokage, and Naruto needs you as his father, especially if he will be the Kyuubi's jailer. I will seal the demon. Minato looked sorely tempted. This seal isn't as easy as the original version I had already showed you. This is for sealing a demon, not killing a ninja. I will show you how to do it and tell me if you can succeed. Sarutobi looked over Minato's hurriedly scrawled notes and listened to his instructions. Unfortunately, the Yondaime was right. His alterations of the Shikifujin Jutsu made it far more difficult. While the Sandaime was fairly confident he could perform the original version, he didn't think he had the skill to perform the second. He didn't have quite the same chakra capacity as his successor, nor was he a seal's master. When they both realized that Minato would have to perform the sealing after all, the Yondaime gave his last instructions. Before I go, promise me you will watch over my son. His mother died giving birth to him, and I will die stopping the Kyuubi. I want to know at least one person will take care of him. On my command, I ask that you remain here for the rest of the battle. Konoha will need you to resume the post as Hokage after my death. I also ask that you let the village know that my dying request is for Naruto to be seen as the hero that he is, not as the demon he contains. Please, I ask you from one father to another, take care of my baby. Sarutobi could only solemnly nod and swear to do as the Yondaime asked. Determinedly, Minato summoned the giant toad Gamabunta and took his son to confront the demon. October 26, 1981. We just don't know what to do anymore. No matter where we go, how we hide, the Dark Lord is only half a step behind us. What do we do? A distressed James Potter ranted at his former headmaster and undisputed leader of the Light, Albus Dumbledore. Albus looked at his former students and their one-year-old baby over his half-moon spectacles, deep in thought. There is only one explanation as to how Voldemort seems to catch up with you so easily. We have a spy in the Order. I had been suspecting it due to the high number of failures any recent missions have been met with. Unfortunately, the fact that the Dark Lord is only able to keep up with you and not the Longbottoms suggests that it is one of your close friends who is indeed the traitor. I'm afraid that it is best that you tell no one where you are going next. It is too dangerous otherwise. You can't be serious. There's no way any of the marauders would turn traitor. You're off your rocker. James's angry rant succeeded in waking up Harry, who gave out a wail, letting the room's occupants know his displeasure at being woken up. Lily was quick to calm both her son and her husband. Now James, we can't ignore the facts. We have moved no less than 4 times in the past 2 weeks. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that one of our friends is a traitor. What if they're under the Imperious curse or had their minds read by someone at work without their knowledge or consent? Either way, Dumbledore has a point. We can't trust your friends like we used to, and we need to find a way to keep Voldemort away from Harry. Seeing that Lily had successfully calmed her husband, Albus decided it was safe to re-enter the conversation. If I may, there is one spell which will not only hide you, but it is impossible to hoodwink your location through spells and potions. The location must be willingly given by the secret keeper. Of course, the Fidelis charm. That would be perfect. James looked back and forth between Lily and Albus. The what charm? The Fidelis charm, his wife replied. It hides a location within a person's being so that no one can find it until it is revealed by the secret keeper. The only problem is that it only works on a stationary location, so to remain hidden we'd have to stay there 24/7. Once we step outside the boundaries of the spell we're fair game. Also, the secret keeper can't live in the location they're hiding, it deteriorates the spell. At most the secret keeper could visit the location 24 hours for every month, but it is preferable if the secret keeps a 50 kilometers distance at all times from the location. If you would like, I am willing to be your secret keeper. Then all your friends may be told the secret to visit you, but unable to reveal your location willingly or not. Lily and James shared a look. As tempted as they were by the offer, they knew they couldn't take it. As much as Albus portrayed himself as the undefeatable leader of the light, those who took the time to notice were able to tell that the combined efforts of being the headmaster of Hogwarts, leading the Order of the Phoenix, being chief warlock of the Wizengamot and supreme mugwump of the International Wizards Confederation and unofficial leader of the light was tiring 100-year-old man out. The added stress of being the secret keeper and maintaining the charm would be too much to ask for. No, the Potters could not take up Dumbledore's offer in good conscience. Thank you for the offer, Albus, Lily declined, but we'll just use one of our friends that we are 100% certain are loyal. This way we won't have to wait until you're available to perform the spell. Though Dumbledore saw through their weak excuse, he let them go with no more than another offer of lemon drops. He could only hope that he was wrong about their being a traitor and things would work out for the young family. The members of the Council of Konoha like to pride themselves on the fact that they are generally powerful, smart and authoritative people. However, at this point in time they didn't seem like it, as the Sandaime could attest to. Currently the members of the council were yelling incoherently and gave the impression of toddlers in the middle of a tantrum than the stoic, dignified men they usually portray themselves as. The demon should be killed. All my land, destroyed. I demand. Monster. The fourth gave his life, and how do you respect his demise? By protecting his murderer. It was the last yelled comment that caused the third Hokage to put an end to the council's never-ending protests. Enough. I have heard enough of your opinions about something you know nothing about. Perhaps if you'd take the time to let me explain, then you'd realize what I'm doing is for the best. Though everyone knew that the Sandaime was wise and powerful, he was a Hokage after all. The monkey summoner was generally fairly passive, especially since his retirement, making many forget just how powerful he really was. But it now became obvious that despite his years of relaxation, the third was no pushover and was going to perform the duties of the Hokage with his all once again. You all dare to come in here, demanding for retribution and vengeance against an innocent babe. If you are all well and able enough to plot assassination attempts on an infant, then you should be helping Konoha and do more important things, healing the wounded, building houses, burying the dead. Those in the crowded office at least had the decency to be slightly ashamed of themselves for thinking of their own anger instead of the needs of others, but it did not reduce their need for vengeance against the one they blamed for the massacre. Sarutobi had hoped that no one would find out about Naruto's role in the Kyuubi's defeat, just pass him off as one of the numerous victims who had lost all his family. Unfortunately, there were too many witnesses, and among those witnesses a few high-ranking shinobi who were able to understand what the seal on Naruto's stomach meant, to do so. Word spread of the baby who contained the nine-tailed fox before the third had a chance to stop it. Now let me explain a few things to you all. The fourth was a seals master, he knew what he was doing. The child is the Kyuubi's jailer, not the Kyuubi himself. Uzumaki Naruto is no more a demon than you or me. If anything, Naruto is a hero. He is just as responsible, if not more so, than the Yondaime for the defeat of the nine-tailed fox. It was the Yondaime's last wish that the child be treated with the dignity and respect which he deserves. How dare you come in pretending that you killed the child in the name of the fourth when his dying wish was for the child to be cherished and loved? The Sandaime's words were able to silence the protesters, but the third knew that their anger and need for vengeance was not sated. Unfortunately, there was only so much he could do, even as the Hokage. Any special treatment would be seen as favoritism, or heaven forbid, as the demon manipulating him. Sarutobi briefly considered telling the villagers that Naruto was the Yondaime's son. That way they would have more respect for the child, being the only son of their hero, and feel more obligated to honor the fourth's wishes. But there were downsides as well. As the yellow flash of Konoha, Minato had gained a fair number of enemies who would go after his son. And what if the villagers didn't believe him, thinking it was just a ploy to protect the child? Or even worse, believe that he was Minato's son who was overtaken by the Kyuubi? Then they'd be even angrier at the child, believing the demon had killed their hero's only son, and probably help any of Minato's enemies kill the baby, if they didn't do it themselves. What could he do to keep his promise to Minato without causing a riot? How could the villagers hate one so young who wouldn't even know or understand the negative thoughts and emotions directed at him? As of now, Uzumaki Naruto is under my protection. I expect him to be treated with the same respect and fairness you showed to every other member of Konoha. Any action taken against the child will be met with 3 times the punishment. No mention of the demon he contains is to ever be mentioned, on penalty of death. As far as the younger generation is concerned, the fourth killed the Kyuubi and Naruto is an ordinary boy. Seeing as how the Sandaime would not budge on the matter, the Hokage's office gradually emptied. Sarutobi only hoped that his new law would ensure that Naruto not be prejudiced against his own generation, since it appeared that it was too late for everyone else. October 30, 1981. 1-year-old Harry Potter yawned cutely as he woke up from his nap. Lately he'd been having odd dreams, even though the baby himself didn't realize that his dreams were unusual. When he falls asleep, he often finds himself in the presence of another baby. But the other baby was younger and smaller than he was, which was something of a curiosity to Harry, since he had never seen another baby before. The other baby couldn't even crawl, let alone walk, albeit Harry could only take a few wobbly steps. That was okay with Harry though. He liked the other baby and would often cuddle with him since he was both warmer and comfier than Hoggy, his stuffed dragon. The other baby probably liked him too, since he rarely cried and smiled whenever he got hold of Harry's hair or fingers. But now that he was awake, all thoughts of other baby were pushed to the back of his mind, too occupied by thoughts of food, where his parents were and what that fun-looking shiny thing on the shelf was. First things first though, he needed to escape his crib. Mommy. A few moments later, Lily Potter entered the nursery to fetch her son. Hello sweetie, did you have a nice nap? I bet you're hungry. And after you eat you can play with your silly godfather who should be here any minute now. But first, let's change your diaper. Harry didn't really understand what his mother was saying, but he loved being picked up and showed his appreciation by giggling and clapping. After being changed and fed, Lily brought her son to the living room. When Harry saw who was there, he started squealing. Patty was always so much fun. Lily, however, was distracted by the unexpected third man in the room. Oh, hello Peter. I didn't know you were coming over today, or I would have made more lunch. Today was going to be the day they performed the Fidelis charm. They had already discussed with Sirius, James's best friend and Harry's godfather, and he had agreed to be their secret keeper. Lily didn't want to be rude, but she hoped Peter would leave soon. She wanted the spell over and done with so she could sleep at night knowing her baby was safe. Peter's presence was making her confused and uncertain. Actually Lils, I invited him. I know we had originally agreed that I be the secret keeper, but I thought this way you would be safer. Lily looked to her husband to see if he had any idea what Sirius was talking about. Padfoot thinks that he's too obvious a choice as secret keeper. He suggested switching to Wormtail. James's voice and expression showed just how reluctant he was of the suggestion. Seeing how neither Potter was taken by the suggestion, Sirius defended his idea. Think about it. Everyone knows that I'd be your first choice. Peter would be the last person they'd suspect as the secret keeper. While he goes into hiding to keep you guys safe, I could lead Voldemort and his merry band of Death Eaters on a wild goose chase. And this way I can visit Lil Pronslet as much as I like without straining the wards. Peter was feeling more and more upset the longer the conversation went on. When Sirius had first approached him asking him to be Lily's and James's secret keeper, he had felt honored, and guilty, that his friends would trust him so much. Sirius had told him the reason for the switch was to find out who the traitor in the order was, as they'd obviously go after Sirius, Harry's godfather and James's best man, for the Potter's location. That had made Peter feel both nervous at the fact that they knew there was a spy and proud that he had fooled everybody, including the great Albus Dumbledore, since obviously no one suspected him if he was to be the secret keeper. But now he finds out that not only did James and Lily not know about the switch, they didn't like the idea of him being their secret keeper. And the reasons Sirius was now listing are slightly different than the reasons he gave to Peter. When Sirius told him the reasons for the switch, it sounded like it was because he was trustworthy and dependable. Now it sounded like Peter was only chosen because he was thought to be too weak for the enemy to consider him, and so Sirius could spend more time with the Potters. He might not have gotten the highest scores at school, but that didn't mean he was weak or stupid. And why wouldn't Lily and James at least consider the idea before rejecting it? Did they think so little of his loyalty? Never mind the fact that he was already a spy. And why should it matter that Sirius wouldn't be able to visit as often as opposed to him? Shouldn't he have just as much right visiting his friends and little Harry? I don't know, Patty. It'd be awfully dangerous leading around a bunch of Death Eaters by their noses. I don't want to see you get hurt. Geez, thanks for worrying about my safety, James. I mean, it's not like I'm the one who's going to suffer the stress of the spell and be responsible for your family's well-being or anything. Peter thought sarcastically. Peter may be a bit of a coward, willing to do just about anything to ensure his own survival, but that didn't mean he was all bad. If there was any way to leave Voldemort, and remain amongst the living, he would do it in a heartbeat. He agreed with neither Voldemort's ideals nor his methods. And Peter was still loyal to his friends whom he had shared the best times of his life with. He only gave the Dark Lord information when his life was on the line, which was almost always, and even then tried to limit it to information that wouldn't put his friends in harm's way. And anytime he was forced to reveal the Potter's location, he'd try to make sure they got out all right. But the longer Sirius tried to convince the Potters to switch secret keepers, the more Peter was feeling underappreciated, angry and bitter. If you're sure, of course I am. Trust me, this will work, Sirius assured. Sirius was excited. They were going to do it. As much as Sirius would have liked to be the secret keeper to ensure the Potters' safety, he felt that this plan was better. When James told him of a possible spy in their group, he had been adamant that there was some sort of mistake. A marauder turned traitor? Never. But James had wanted to perform the Fidelis charm regardless. Later, when the idea of a traitor had time to take root, Sirius began thinking on who it could be. Obviously it wasn't James, or he wouldn't have married a Muggle born and little Harry would be dead. That only left Peter and Remus. Peter was a pureblood, but only a third-generation one. His grandparents, except one, were Muggle-born and his mother had been a half-blood. He didn't possess the influence or power that the Dark Lord prefers when it comes to his followers. The only reason the Dark Lord would tolerate him would because of he had friends in high places and the fact that he was an animagus, which the Dark Lord didn't know since he wasn't registered. He'd be no more than a lackey. In contrast, on the light side Peter had good friends, morals he could agree with, and an adorable pseudo-nephew who may or may not have the power to end the war. He'd have nothing to gain and everything to lose by joining Voldemort. Remus was a half-blood and a werewolf. While most of those on the Dark Lord's side would consider Remus to be a mere insect, in an effort to increase his numbers Voldemort has been appealing to magical creatures, including werewolves, who have been discriminated against and subjugated, promising equal rights and freedoms as every other wizard. If the Dark Lord actually kept his promise, Remus would have much more to gain by joining Voldemort. But even though there was proof of a spy and all signs pointed to Remus, Sirius couldn't help but hope that there had been some sort of mistake. With this plan he'd know for sure. He'll purposely allow Remus to make his move with the false knowledge that Sirius was the secret keeper. He needed to know for sure where Remus' loyalties lay. Then it's decided, Peter will be the secret keeper. November 1, 1981. Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts, head of Gryffindor House and Professor of Transfiguration, sat patiently on the stone wall in front of 4 Privet Drive. It has been a long, eventful day and she would like nothing better than to go back to her quarters and sleep until late afternoon tomorrow, but she was determined to see her plan through. It had started early in the morning, or late last night, when Dumbledore fire-called her to tell her that he had to deal with an emergency situation and that she was in charge until his return. Even though it had become common for Minerva to take care of the headmaster's duties since the war begun, It didn't change the fact that she was always left worried and nervous for whatever had called Dumbledore away from Hogwarts this time. It wasn't until hours later that the news of the Dark Lord's defeat reached her. Classes were cancelled and a nationwide celebration took place. Owls flew everywhere and people were dancing in the streets. Thankfully, Minerva wasn't the type to get carried away by the hype as others were. As much as she wished she could believe as easily as others that the Dark Lord was indeed gone, she needed to know for certain. Which brings us back what Minerva was doing sitting on the stone wall in front of a Muggle house in her tabby cat Animagus form. According to the rumors, during the night of October 31st, the Dark Lord attacked the Potters, killing Lily and James. But then the story becomes unbelievable. They say that the Voldemort tried to kill little Harry, but the killing curse, which, as the name implies, kills what it hits, didn't work. It hit Harry, and it had more than enough power to take the child's life, but for whatever reason it rebounded and killed the Dark Lord instead. She had overheard Hagrid talking about how Harry would be left with his aunt, which is why the Transfiguration professor was on the cold wall waiting for Dumbledore to bring the baby back from St. Mungo's, where he had been looked over to determine if there were any adverse side effects from surviving the killing curse. Finally, after long hours of waiting, the headmaster arrived. The eccentrically dressed man strode down the dark and deserted street chuckling softly at the sight of the stiffly sitting cat. "Minerva, I should have expected you to be here. I do hope that you weren't here all day and took part in some of the festivities." Minerva changed back into her human form and glared at the idea that she would be off partying with the rest of the masses. Getting drunk and dancing around was hardly her style. Not to mention that she spent her whole day out here on this wall and she would not be deterred from finding out what she wanted to know. "I heard the Dark Lord attacked the Potters last night. I heard that Lily and James, that they were killed." Dumbledore's bowed head was all the answer she needed. They were dead. Minerva spared a moment in respect and to gather her thoughts. Though she hadn't been particularly close with the Potters, Lily and James had been among her favorite students and she had gotten to see them every now and then at order meetings. "That's not all," Minerva continued. "I heard that the Dark Lord also tried to kill their son Harry. But for whatever reason he wasn't able to, and Harry survived with nothing more than a scar on his head." Once again the headmaster confirmed it as truth. "But how? It shouldn't be possible. After the hundreds who have died by that curse, someone survives? And the Dark Lord somehow defeated by a baby. How is it possible? I don't know for certain. Indeed, we may never know for sure how it was possible. But it has happened." Their conversation was interrupted by the approaching sound of a motor. In the sky was a descending motorcycle, with a giant of a man holding something close to his chest. He gently touched down and dismounted, obviously trying not to jostle the bundle in his arms. Minerva and Albus walked over to get a better look at the sleeping baby. "Is that where?" Minerva asked, indicating to the lightning-shaped scar on the child's forehead. "Yes, that is scar left by the killing curse." After a moment of everyone just staring at the baby lost in their thoughts, Albus broke the silence. "Well, there's no need for us to be here any longer. Pass him to me, Hagrid, and I'll leave him by the door." Minerva looked up. She had almost forgotten that the headmaster had planned to leave Harry here. "No, Albus, you can't leave him here. I was watching these people all day and they're the worst sort of parents. Why, I saw their son kicking and screaming all up and down the streets for candy and the mother just gave in to the child's every whim. And when the boy started bullying another child, the mother did nothing to stop it. He'll become spoiled and insufferable, squared. And if he grew up in the wizarding world it would be 10 times worse. This is the safest place for him to grow up with a chance at a normal childhood. Don't worry, I have an old friend of mine who will be moving here soon to look after little Harry as he grows and make sure he had a level head." Minerva sighed and bowed her head in agreement. With the fuss everyone was making about the boy who lived, there was no way for Harry to grow up as he should in the wizarding world. She only hoped that Harry would turn out okay. After depositing the baby on the doorstep with a letter to explain the situation, and making some wards to make sure Harry would be safe, the 3 adults took their leave, not seeing Harry again for another decade. 5-year-old Uzumaki Naruto sat just outside the Hokage's office, swinging his legs back and forth on a too-big-for-him chair. His hair was slightly damp from a recent bath, his clothes were brand new and his stomach was full. That was a big change from the dirty, ragged and hungry state he had been in for the past week and a half when he had been living on his own in the streets. He was waiting for the third Hokage to finish his meeting with Ito Akiko, the matron of the village's orphanage, to find out what was going to happen to him and if he'd go back to the orphanage. It was inevitable that Naruto get kicked out of the orphanage eventually. When Sarutobi had first reluctantly placed him there, if only he'd been able to raise Naruto himself. But unfortunately he didn't have the time and the village would riot. The workers and volunteers were obvious in their disdain for the baby. It was only the ever-watchful eyes of the Anbu stationed to look after Naruto that ensured that the baby was safe and given what he needed. Anyone caught trying to abuse the baby, whether it be physically or just neglecting his basic needs, were dealt with quickly and severely. Workers and volunteers dropped like flies before they got smart enough to provide for Naruto. Unfortunately, that didn't stop them from finding other ways to make the child miserable. They ignored him. Even when handing out food, they'd drop the plate in front of Naruto and scurry off as if the devil were after them. They also discouraged the other children from playing or talking with him. And when they thought nobody was listening, they'd murmur about how he was a demon and a monster. It made Naruto feel like he wasn't really there, and that no one cared. But even though the workers didn't like him, they were too afraid of the Sandame's wrath to kick him out. At least until he was older, when they could claim that Naruto was self-sufficient, or when a needier child came in so they could say they didn't have enough resources. So what brought upon the earlier than planned boot from the orphanage, you ask? Well, I guess it begins with Naruto's dreams. Ever since he could remember, when Naruto dreamed, he always found himself in the presence of a black-haired, green-eyed boy. The boy was about a year older than he was, and his name was Potter Harry, or Harry Potter, as Harry said you say your name where he is from. And that was the root of the problem. The two boys came from very different places. At first the culture difference didn't matter, they were only babies after all, and they just played and slept together. As they got older, they started talking to each other, ignorant of the fact that they didn't speak the same language. And since Harry and Naruto both learned languages the way every other baby does, listening to others speak and then mimicking, they were unknowingly learning two languages instead of one. They would hear their native language while awake and pick up the other's language while asleep. This caused them to speak in a sort of mix between English and Japanese. Not that anyone realized this, since no one really talked to either child. When Harry started going to school, he realized that nobody knew many of the words he knew. After he told Naruto, who then started eavesdropping on the adults' conversations, he realized the same thing, except the adults in Konoha only used the words that the adults in Harry's world didn't use. It wasn't long before Harry's teacher set up a meeting with the Dursleys to talk about Harry's apparent language problems and how to resolve it. Needless to say that Harry got in trouble with his aunt and uncle for being a freak and making up a freaky language. After that incident, both Harry and Naruto tried not to use any words that they hadn't heard an adult around them say. Unfortunately, a week and a half ago, Naruto used a few words from Harry's world accidentally when he was playing with this really hyper kid with bushy eyebrows named Lee, one of the only kids in the orphanage who will play and talk with him. Even though this wasn't the first time Naruto had slipped, it was the first time he was caught by an adult. The matron spared no time to kick him out of the orphanage, screaming about possessed demon spawn speaking in tongues and the corruption of other children. It was a tough time for Naruto. Almost everybody was mean to him and he got very little to eat. Though after getting caught pilfering through a dumpster one day, this old man gave him a bowl of ramen for free, and another free bowl every day since. Yum. Then today, while he was napping in a small alley, the Hokage, who was taking a stroll to escape from his never-ending paperwork, had found him. When the old man found out that he was living in the streets after being kicked out of the orphanage, Naruto was promptly whisked away, given food, a bath and new clothes to wear. Which brings us back to outside the Hokage's office. Just then the door opened and the orphanage matron came storming out, only pausing long enough to shoot a nasty glare at the 5-year-old. Naruto was then directed inside. Upon seeing him, Sarutobi smoothed out his face from the angry frown it was in when talking to Akiko into a genial smile. Well, Naruto, it seems that we have a small problem. The orphanage is full and you can hardly live in the streets for your whole life. For now you can live with my son and his family until we find a more permanent living arrangement. Naruto just sat in silence. There were quite a few empty beds at the orphanage when he was there, so he didn't see why the Sandame said the place was full. Unless they got a lot of new kids this past week. He didn't want to live in the streets again since it wasn't very comfortable and he was always hungry, and the old man seemed nice enough. He was going to miss the free ramen though. Sarutobi stood up and beckoned Naruto to his side as he walked out the door. "Come Naruto, I'll bring you to Ichiro." "Naruto, sit down." The now 7-year-old Harry was trying to get his honorary brother back to work on the English written language, but the blonde-haired mass of energy was instead trying to mimic a ninja he had seen and throw a kunai. Harry sighed and gave up for now, the table that they were working at promptly disappearing. It didn't take long for Naruto and Harry to realize that their dreamscape kid and would become anything that they could think of. They had lots of fun thinking up the weirdest and coolest objects and places. The only problem was that it depended on their knowledge of the things they wanted. For example, when Harry had first described a car to Naruto, something Naruto couldn't quite wrap his mind around, the blonde-haired boy decided he needed to see it to believe it. But instead of asking Harry to think it up, Naruto tried to imagine what it was like. Needless to say that Naruto's version would never actually be physically possible or usable in real life. Another example is when Harry, who hadn't done his homework yet, since the Dursleys had locked him in his cupboard after fighting back when Dudley tried to beat him up, had tried to finish it there. Not only did no question after number 7 show up since he hadn't read those questions yet, but even though he finished the rest his answers they weren't actually on the paper the next morning. But the fact that nothing physical carries over to the waking world also ended up being a bonus whenever either boy got hurt since they were back to normal again in the morning. Harry watched as Naruto tried again and again to hit a target with a kunai. The older boy didn't have the heart to drag Naruto back to work, and to be honest the 7-year-old was feeling restless too, and what Naruto was doing did look like fun. A few seconds later Harry was standing next to the blonde-haired boy throwing his own set of kunai. Though neither boy realized it, the past dozen of months had been life-changing for the both of them. They were more confident, healthier and generally happier. It all started when Naruto was sent to live with the Hokage's oldest son, Ichiro, Ichiro's wife, Yui, and their 2-year-old son, Konohamaru. The Sarutobis were very welcoming to the blonde and made him feel right at home. He wasn't sneered at, he got plenty to eat, they were teaching him how to read, write and do some basic academy ninja exercises. It wasn't long before Naruto became the talkative, energetic boy that he had only been in Harry's presence before. Naruto had also decided what he wanted to be when he was older. After sharing many walks and talks with the Sandame, who Naruto took to calling old man, he noticed how everyone loved and respected him. Yui explained that the Hokage was the strongest ninja in the village, and it was his job to care for and protect the village. The villagers know this, and therefore loved and respected the Hokage in return. To Naruto, there was no turning back. He knew that was the job for him. He would do anything to protect his precious people, and the more precious people the better. He would just have to prove to the village that he was worthy of their respect and love too. Naruto's new living arrangement also indirectly brought upon Harry's transformation into the confident and independent child he was today. Harry had already known all about ninjas in Naruto's society and how Naruto wanted to become one, but he had always figured that Naruto meant the type of ninja like on the cartoons Dudley watched. People who wore all black and were very good at fighting and stealth. He never knew that they had such a thing as chakra. One night, when Naruto was rambling about all the cool things he learned and did that day, he mentioned how he had seen a ninja use a henge, or illusion, to look like someone else. Once Harry processed that Naruto was talking about something that was impossible, unnatural and freakish, as if it were an everyday occurrence, he interrogated his little brother on all things chakra. According to Naruto, who had asked Yui, Ichiro and the old man, chakra was something that everyone and everything had. But only some people could use it, and even then you had to be trained properly. Harry realized that, yes, magic, or chakra, did exist. Therefore he must have really turned his teacher's hair purple, opened the locked cupboard door, regrew his hair and all those other things he'd been in denial about. Other people probably had it too, but they just couldn't use it like he could. His aunt and uncle must have known. Why else would they be so against anything abnormal and hate him so much? Since then Harry and Naruto have been trying out their powers and seeing what they could do. This in turn boosted Naruto's confidence, especially since he was the one doing most of the teaching to Harry, and increased his own skills, so that Naruto was positive that he'll one day become a great ninja and Hokage. And it allowed Harry to gain leverage on his family, ensuring he'd get proper meal portions, Dudley's second bedroom, and he was left alone more, which gave him more time to try out new techniques. Granted, Harry still had to do an unfair amount of chores and his family hated him more than ever, but that was fine with the brunette. Naruto was all the family he needed. Amino Uruka looked around at his first ever class. Sure, he had been an assistant teacher before and had even taught a few lessons on his own, but this was the first time he could call a class full of students his very own. The other teachers said that your first class was usually the most memorable and the one you become closest with. Uruka had a feeling that even without this being the first group of students to call his own, this class would have been memorable. After all, it isn't often that you get such a big group of kids, especially when at least a quarter belong to Konoha's infamous clans. It isn't rare for a baby boom to occur after war. What better way to celebrate newly found peace than finding someone to love and creating a family? In fact, if Uruka remembered correctly, his class would make up almost half of the total amount of students attending the Ninja Academy. Granted that by the time the students reach their third year at the Ninja Academy, about half of a class leaves, deciding that becoming a ninja just isn't for them. The school system for Konoha's shinobi is as follows. All children start attending school this September when they're turning 6. It's only half days at the civilian school where they learn how to read and write and do some basic math. The next year they continue to have half days at the civilian school and can start attending the Ninja Academy for the other half of the day. Even children who don't plan to become ninjas usually attend the first year or two at the Ninja Academy, since they learn basic self-defense and survival training, which is useful for anyone, ninja or no, and they learn more in-depth history of the ninja wars. Due to the large number of students this year, they split the class in two, so while half the class is in the civilian school, the other half would be attending the Ninja Academy and then in the afternoon they would switch. This was different from other years in that before, they could just keep all the students together, allowing both the ninja instructor and the civilian teacher to get half a day off. Which was probably why they gave the 18-year-old newly christened Chunin such an important class. That, and the other instructors probably didn't want to deal with the fussy and demanding clan heads. When the children finish their third year of school, second year in the Ninja Academy, they choose whether they want to attend the civilian or ninja school full-time for the next 3 years, longer for the civilian school. Usually around half of the class stays in the Ninja Academy while the rest go to the civilian school. This is also when the practical lessons in the academy involve chakra use and jutsus instead of just strategy, traps, survival training and taijutsu. From this point on, students are allowed to try graduating early, though if they have parental permission, they are allowed to take the test even earlier, like Uchiha Itachi, who only spent 1 year in the academy, and Hitaki Kakashi, who didn't even attend 1 whole month. It is strongly recommended that students don't try passing the exam until the end though. Once they pass the academy exam, they are split into teams of 3 based on their strengths and weaknesses. Priority is given to older graduates, so even if someone graduated early, which is pretty rare, she might not be put on a team until their year mates graduate anyway. Generally, these people tend to go back to the academy to wait with their year mates, but sometimes they find someone who is willing to train them one-on-one or joins a team that is missing a member. Once on a team, they are assigned a Junin instructor, also based on the team's strengths and weaknesses, who will teach them higher-level jutsus and lead them in missions, allowing the students improve their skills, gain experience and develop their own specialty and style of fighting. The Junin instructor has the right to refuse teaching the team. Therefore, each Junin usually has their own test to see if the students are skilled enough, mature enough, and all around good enough that the Junin is willing to train and lead them for the next few years. Any teams that fail the Junin's test usually end up back in the academy, unless they can find someone else to take them in, which is also very rare. After a year or two of not being able to join a team, get a Junin instructor, most students go back to civilian school and quit being a ninja. If Uruka went with the averages of previous years, of the 40-something number of students in this class, Uruka guessed that only around 20 would stay in the academy after the third year, maybe a bit more. By the time they were ready to graduate, another 5 to 10 would drop out after realizing that they didn't have the necessary skills and or drive to continue being a ninja. Most of the students who stayed till the end passed the academy exam, but for usual-sized classes only 1 team for every 2 years usually end up passing the Junin's exam. Considering the large number of the class, Uruka figured they were guaranteed at least one genin team from this class. Then again, considering the large amount of students from ninja clans, maybe 2 or 3 teams might make it. It always shocked Uruka that only an average of 7% of children born in a given year will make to a genin team. And that's not even going into how many of that 7% end up getting the rank of chunin or junin. But then again, those statistics were for times of peace, like now, when students weren't encouraged to graduate early and when junin could afford to be picky and any lone genin couldn't easily find a team with a member or two short to fill in for. Uruka pushed the statistics to the back of his mind. The students had finally settled down. Uruka took a large breath and begun his first lesson. Naruto sighed once again as the math problem in front of him refused to solve itself. He would much rather be with Harry, who was running around doing some exercises Naruto had showed him from the academy. But the blonde knew that the green-eyed boy wouldn't let him get away with it until after the worksheet was done correctly. While Naruto was enjoying most of his lessons at the academy, they had just learned how to set a basic trap, which Naruto was dying to try out. His classes at the civilian school were going very badly. His teacher didn't like him for some reason, and she made no effort to hide it. She never had enough books for the whole class, which always meant that everyone got a book except Naruto. Never mind the fact that the morning class had one more person than they did and they always seemed to have enough books. Anyone caught sharing or aiding Naruto got detention, so obviously the other students were no help. And any homework Naruto did complete was lost, or just got a 0. Needless to say that Naruto took to skipping classes to practice on his limited ninja skills instead of suffering through all that. But then he got in trouble with the old man, and the last thing Naruto wanted to do was have one of his important people disappointed in him, especially after what happened to Ichiro and Yui. When Harry found out how Naruto was treated, he was furious. The next little while was spent planning the best ways to prank the teacher and get revenge. There wasn't a day that she didn't have blue hair, or green skin, or could open the classroom door without consequence. Well, until the old man insisted Naruto put a stop to it. At least for now. Unfortunately, due to the teacher's unfounded hate, Naruto wasn't really taught anything, or was taught the wrong things. His assigned desk was way in the back, behind the tallest kid in class to make sure he couldn't see the board. Any assignments he got back were marked with the wrong answers. Thankfully, there was Harry. Even though Harry and Naruto were taught different names and symbols for numbers, the math was still the same. Harry made sure that Naruto learned all he needed to know, which is why the blonde boy was sitting at the table, doing the worksheet that Harry had given him. In exchange, Naruto taught Harry everything he learned in the academy. But even though Harry was now the fastest kid at school and could easily beat up Dudley and his gang, who were still stronger, but much slower and very clumsy with no formal training, Harry would still lose to Naruto more often than not. Currently Harry was practicing some taijutsu drills that Naruto showed him, but he knew he would have to do it again once he woke up. They figured out that nothing physical that happens when they're asleep really happens to their body after Naruto got in trouble with Iruka-sensei for slacking on his homework exercises. When Naruto tried to argue that he did do them, Uruka went into a rant about how he obviously didn't since he had no muscle memory of them and therefore his reflexes were too slow. After glancing dejectedly at his older brother one last time, Naruto forced himself to focus back on the evil math problems. At least Harry didn't know enough about Konoha's language and history to force even more homework on him. The secretary ushered the nervous Chunin inside the Hokage's office. One could hardly blame the young academy teacher for being nervous. It wasn't every day that you saw the strongest ninja in the village, especially one-on-one. But if the young man prided himself on one thing, it was that he was a good teacher and did all he could for his students. Even if the student in question was one he wasn't comfortable around. When Uruka had begun teaching all those months ago, it had been hard. Who knew that getting 20-something 6- and 7-year-olds to sit still was so exhausting? Never mind the work involved of organizing lesson plans, marking assignments and making sure all the students understood what you were teaching. It was tiring work, but definitely worth it to see the kids learn and thrive. Being the caring and dedicated teacher that he was, he always looked out to see if he could help his students. Whether it was a child who needed another explanation but was too shy to ask for it, stopping someone from being bullied or making sure all the students had the necessary equipment for school. This brought Uzumaki Naruto to his attention. Well, to be fair, Uruka had always noticed Naruto, how could he not? The blonde was a mass of energy, he never sat still, was extremely loud, a compulsive prankster, and if there was a fight, Naruto was involved more likely than not. The fact that he was the Kyuubi's container also put the blonde-haired boy on Uruka's radar. But until recently, the young Chunin had just thought that boy was nothing but trouble and an annoying nuisance who didn't have the skills nor the attitude needed to be a ninja, let alone the next Hokage, as the boy always proclaimed he would be. But then Uruka started noticing other things. Like the fact that Naruto didn't always have a lunch, or that his writing skills and vocabulary wasn't quite up to par with his classmates, despite being in the same civilian class. That no one ever came to pick him up or drop him off at school. How the other kids avoided him and teased him. The fact that most of the fights Naruto got into was started by someone else. And the fact that Naruto always got in trouble for it, even if the other kids didn't. Uruka tried to convince himself that what he noticed were just one-time things. After all, everyone knew that foxes were tricksters. He was probably just messing with the teacher. And there was no way the demon within him would let mere mortals treat him like that. But one weekend, when Uruka was buying his groceries, he witnessed the boy being kicked out of the store for doing nothing more than browsing for food. There was no more denying it, Naruto was being mistreated. But how badly was it? And what could he do about it? When Uruka tried to bring it to his fellow teachers' attention, they just got mad at him. They said he was overreacting, and anyway, the boy deserved everything he got and more. Since no one else was willing to help, and anything he did was overruled by the other teachers, Uruka made an appointment with the Hokage to try and find a solution. After a long time with no response, Uruka figured that his request was denied, which was just as well anyway. The Hokage was certainly too busy to deal with such a trivial matter as a young Chunin's suspicions. And the school year was almost over now anyway. But just as he was considering making a second request, a messenger told him that the Hokage was willing to meet with him on the weekend. Which is why Uruka found himself standing in front of the strongest ninja in the village, trying hard not to fidget. "Ah, Uruka, how are you?" The Sandame greeted with a warm smile. "I'm fine, Hokage-sama, thank you." The Chunin replied. "You requested a meeting some time ago. I'm sorry for the long wait, apparently the paperwork was, misplaced." Sarutobi said, with a shadow falling over his eyes at the last word. And now that Uruka thought about it, the secretary who had just ushered him in was different from the one that he filed the request with. "So, you have noticed some discrepancies concerning Uzumaki Naruto, The Hokage said, interrupting Uruka from his inner musings. "Tell me, what have you seen?" Uruka proceeded to tell the leader of the village all the things he had noticed and or suspected, how others treat the boy, children and adult alike. How he has no one to take care of him, how he doesn't always have a lunch, etc. If it weren't for the increasing ominous feelings in the room, the Chunin would have said that Sarutobi was taking everything he said quite calmly. When the young man was done, the Hokage was silent for a few minutes. He stared intently at Uruka, making the Chunin feel as though his soul was bared and that he was being judged. After a few more moments of stifling silence, Uruka seemed to pass the examination, or whatever it was, since suddenly the room lost its oppressive atmosphere and became more welcoming. "How much do you know about Uzumaki Naruto?" Before Uruka could open his mouth, Sarutobi interrupted him. "I mean the child, not the demon vessel." Uruka closed his mouth in confusion. Weren't they the same thing? "What I'm asking Uruka-san, is if you know Naruto's favorite food. His favorite color, where he lives, his best friends, his favorite games to play. I'm asking if you know about the boy himself, not just of the demon he contains." The academy teacher thought about it. He didn't know any of those things. Judging by the Hokage's knowing look, the Sandame was aware of it too. Thankfully, rather than have the teacher scramble and stutter for an answer, he smiled at Uruka and stood up, beckoning the Chunin to walk with him. "Well, there's no time like the present to find the answers, nay? It's amazing how different something can be if you just take the time to step back and look at it through another perspective." Uruka thought as he continued his stroll with the Hokage. For the past hour the Sandame was regaling Uruka with stories pertaining Naruto, sounding for all the world like a proud grandparent. The teenager for his part couldn't help but grow fond of the Naruto in the stories, a mischievous, energetic boy with a heart of gold. Sarutobi stopped walking after finishing the story of the time Naruto stole his Hokage hat, and refused to give it back until Sarutobi was forced to send the Anbu after him. Uruka looked around. They had stopped in front of an old apartment building in the cheaper part of town. He waited patiently to find out what they were doing there. "Do you see the window on the top right?" Sarutobi asked his young companion. "That is where Uzumaki Naruto currently resides." Uruka looked up and thought. It wasn't the nicest place, but from the looks of things it had a good view of the Hokage mountain and the most of the village. The windows were also big enough for easy access to the rooftops, but then again most apartments in Konoha shared that feature. Who lives with him? Shouldn't he be in the orphanage? Surely he's too young to live on his own? Uruka asked. A dark cloud seemed to pass over the Sandame's face as he replied. He didn't always live alone. He had lived in the orphanage until he was 5, when he got kicked out. No one else was willing to take him in, so I had sent him to live with my oldest son. No more words needed to be said. Everyone knew what happened to the Hokage's oldest son and daughter-in-law. Over a year ago Sarutobi Yui died while on an A-class mission, and Sarutobi Ichiro was assassinated not even 2 months later for being the son of the Hokage. Fortunately their 4-year-old son still lives, but he's rarely ever allowed to leave the safety of the Hokage tower. Though the Sandame had another son who was only a few years older than Uruka himself, Asuma, if Uruka remembered correctly. He was somewhat estranged from his father and had left a couple of years ago to become one of the 12 elite guardians of the Fire Country's daimyo. He only returned for the funerals and had no interest in raising Konohamaru, let alone Naruto. As the Sandame and Uruka made their way back towards the Hokage tower, the young brunette thought about all he had learned. Now that he thought about it, Naruto was similar to how he had been when he was a kid. When his parents died in the Kyuubi attack, Uruka was left alone and didn't know what to do. He turned to pranks and jokes to connect with others, but even then he still felt lonely inside. It wasn't until his talk with the Sandame that he started to feel better. Maybe all Naruto needed was someone to talk to as well. According to the Hokage, Naruto's favorite food was ramen, and Uruka did love the ramen at Ichiraku's. Maybe he could treat the blonde boy there sometime. Harry ran as Dudley and his gang chased him for another round of Harry hunting. You'd think they'd have learned by now that the messy-haired brunette could easily take on all of them, but then again it was Dudley and his gang. But even though Harry could defend himself with no problems against the bullies, it usually just wasn't worth it, something the boys chasing him knew very well. Somehow the Dursleys and the other parents of Dudley's gang made it out that Harry was the bully instead of the other way around. Never mind the fact that the boys had Harry outnumbered 6-1 and that they were all bigger than him too. But if one of them came home with so much as a scratch on them, the parents raised such a fuss and made a huge production out of it, resulting in numerous detentions and endless chores for the green-eyed boy. On the whole, it was easier on Harry if he just ran away instead of fighting back. Harry skidded to a halt as he saw that he had accidentally run into the alleyway between the school building and the end of the chain-link fence surrounding the school property, where the school kept its dumpsters. Trapped as he was, he would have no choice but to fight since he refused to just take the beating. Harry looked around fruitlessly for inspiration, trying to use the time it took the other boys to catch up to find a way to avoid fighting, and therefore avoid getting in trouble. Suddenly Harry got an idea. During one of their many talks about ninja techniques that Naruto knew of, the blonde boy said how he had seen ninjas disappear in a poof of smoke only to reappear somewhere else. Neither boy had really tried that one out yet, since Naruto didn't know the hand seals or anything else about how to perform it, he had just seen it done. Well, there was no time like the present to try and figure it out. Harry closed his eyes and concentrated with all his being on being somewhere else. Somewhere where Dudley and his gang can't get him. There was an uncomfortable sensation of being squeezed through a small tube, and then Harry was suddenly on the roof. Harry whooped at his success, ecstatic at getting it right. He couldn't wait to tell Naruto. Unfortunately, his whoop of joy caught the attention of the teacher on yard duty, who promptly started yelling at him about climbing school buildings and detention. Harry sighed. So much for avoiding trouble. Naruto walked down the street, a little at a loss for what to do. It was finally summer vacation, and even though Naruto was glad he wouldn't have to go to school for another 2 months, especially the civilian school, the blonde was undeniably bored. Children from ninja clans usually spent the summers learning more about their respective clan techniques and histories. Civilian children helped their parents with their businesses or farms, or whatever they did for a living. Being an orphan, Naruto obviously couldn't do either. There was summer school, but it was meant for kids 9 years of age or older. It helped kids who wanted to switch from being a full-time civilian school student to a full-time academy student, or vice versa, catch up with their peers. The unknowing Kyuubi vessel wandered aimlessly, until he noticed his academy teacher waving his arms to get the boy's attention. At first Naruto didn't really care for Uruka-sensei. Sure, he seemed nice enough and was a pretty good teacher, but he had always looked at Naruto the same way as the other adults did. As if he wasn't really seeing the boy but threw him to something else. That look always made Naruto feel small, insignificant and uncomfortable, as if he wasn't really there. But near the end of the school year, Uruka-sensei had started looking at Naruto as if he were really seeing him. And he had even treated the blonde to eat Shiraku's, which was his all-time favorite place to eat, after a few detentions. By the time summer break came along, Uruka was slowly but surely making a spot for himself on the boy's precious people list. "Ah, Naruto, I'm glad I found you. The Hokage asked me to escort you to his office. He has a request for you." "Anyo, what does the old man want?" the confused boy asked. "I think he has a proposition for you, but it'd be best to hear it from Hokage-sama himself." "Come on," Uruka replied, excited about what the old man wanted. Naruto eagerly followed the Chunin towards the Hokage tower. Harry hit the ground with a resounding thud. He was quick to roll out of the way of Naruto's following attack and get to his feet. The boys were sparring, which wasn't an unusual occurrence. Boys will be boys after all. Especially when said boys were training to become ninjas. And even though any injuries sustained from their spars were gone when they woke up as if they were never there at all, which, they technically weren't, it still hurt in the dream world. And it was usually Harry who suffered more from it, being the physically weaker of the two, much to his displeasure. His only condolence was that he was still faster than the blonde boy. Naruto's second year at the Ninja Academy was drawing to a close, and the energetic boy couldn't wait for next year when he could finally stop attending the civilian class with the unfairly biased teacher and attend the academy full-time. He was also hoping for an opportunity to make some friends since about a quarter the kids in his year will be in his class for the first time ever. Naruto ran after the retreating brunette, hoping to press his advantage. But Harry used Naruto's momentum against his little brother and threw him to the ground. Unfortunately for the older boy, while falling, the blonde snagged one of his wrists and dragged Harry down with him. Though Harry tried to spring back to his feet, he couldn't outmaneuver Naruto on the ground where his speed was next to useless against Naruto's strength. The blue-eyed boy finally got his older brother securely pinned, though he got an elbow to the face in the effort, forcing Harry to concede defeat. After the tiring spar, both boys retreated to a comfortable spot beneath a giant tree that conveniently appeared, to catch their breaths and relax. "Guess what? Oji-san said that some people from Grass Country are going to visit next week, so I won't see the old man so much, but when they're gone he'll take me out to Ichikaru's." Ever since this past summer, Naruto had been seeing his honorary grandfather more often, which was a good thing in Harry's opinion since the dark-haired boy knew how much Naruto missed Ichiro and Yui, and how lonely he had been. At the beginning of the summer, the Sandame had offered Naruto a job of sorts. Apparently remembering the blonde boy's dream of becoming Hokage from one of their previous conversations, and knowing that Naruto wouldn't have anything to occupy him during the summer months. And even more importantly that a bored Naruto was a very mischievous Naruto. Sarutobi allowed Naruto to work for him doing various odd jobs in the Hokage tower. Naruto was obviously thrilled to start, but was a little disappointed when all he did was deliver messages and help file papers. On the upside, Naruto now had a steady source of money. His child welfare checks always got lost, and was allowed in the Hokage tower whenever he wanted. And anytime the old man had a spare minute or two, he'd spend it with Naruto either talking, helping Naruto with his homework, even if Naruto would rather do other things, or treating the boy to something to eat, ramen more often than not. The rest of Naruto's spare time, besides when Naruto was practicing some wicked cool ninja techniques of course, was spent in Uruka's presence, who usually treated Naruto to ramen anywhere from once a month to once a week. Uruka-sensei also took it upon himself to make sure that Naruto did all his homework, Not that he wouldn't have done it anyway, eventually, since Harry would have been upset if he didn't, and helped develop Naruto's lagging vocabulary and written skills. After a few minutes of just relaxing, Harry started telling Naruto about what he learned that day. It was a ritual of sorts. Usually when they first show up in the dreamscape, they start out with a warm-up and then Naruto tells Harry what he did that day. After a few drills the boys sparred. Then they'd relax for a bit and talk about nothing and everything for a while. Afterwards, it would be Harry's turn to talk about his day and teach what he learned to Naruto. Afterwards they did what they felt like doing at that point in time. Sometimes they went swimming, other times they just played around, or worked on something one or both had problems with. Often they would just nap so they wouldn't get headaches from processing so much information without giving their subconscious enough rest to deal with it all. But as time went by, they had fewer headaches and therefore actually slept less and less. Today, the boys were going to try and find a recipe that was easy enough for Naruto to use, using ingredients that Naruto could afford and make it so the meal was both nutritious and delicious. When Naruto had first gotten his apartment, he obviously wasn't quite ready to live on his own. He'd only been 5 years old, definitely not old enough to know how to cook, clean and manage a budget. The Sandaime took care of all monetary issues and supplied a steady stream of genin to provide food and cleaning services for the blonde, disguised as D-rank missions to the disgruntled ninja. When Naruto had started getting close to Uruka-sensei, the Chunin also helped Naruto with the household chores. It was very good timing when Uruka and Naruto became friends, since more than 6 months ago, near the beginning of Naruto's second year at the academy, Uchiha Itachi, the prodigy child of one of the most influential and powerful clans of Konoha, killed the rest of his family except his little brother, Sasuke. All ninjas and many civilians were shuffled around to try and fill the void the Uchiha clan left behind, especially since at least 40% of the police force had been Uchihas. Therefore Naruto's genin helpers had stopped being assigned to help him and hadn't come back ever since. Harry had tried to help his younger brother by teaching him how to cook and do laundry, which were tasks Harry often had to do for the Dursleys. While Naruto was able to learn how to do laundry easily enough, they found a problem with the cooking. None of the common dishes were the same and Harry had access to ingredients Naruto didn't have, and vice versa. So sometimes when the boys were in a curious and playful mood, they liked to experiment with cooking in the dreamscape. If nothing came of it, well at least they had fun throwing random things together and making a mess. If they were successful, then it would be good for Naruto who couldn't always depend on others for food. Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto paused from eating the goodness that was ramen long enough to find out what was going on. He looked behind him to see a rapidly approaching Amino Uruka looking very angry about something. Naruto racked his brain to figure out which prank that he'd pulled would have this effect on the Chunin, and of those which one was he caught as the culprit. Best not admit anything until he knew more details. "Ah, Uruka-sensei, are you going to eat some delicious ramen with me?" Naruto asked in his most innocent voice and with his, "I couldn't have possibly done it," face. "Naruto." Uruka growled out as a warning. Seeing that Uruka wasn't in the mood for his, "I'm oblivious" approach, Naruto tried another tactic. "What? I didn't do it. I was framed, I say, framed." The boy yelled with highly exaggerated gestures. Though anyone else would have missed it, Naruto knew Uruka well enough to catch the slight upturn of his lips and see his eyes soften from anger and gain a small twinkle of amusement at his theatrics. Mission accomplished, Naruto thought with a grin. "Naruto, I know you didn't like your teacher, but did you really have to make an experienced Chunin go through so much stress that he suffered a mental breakdown? He not only refused to teach your class again, but he quit being a teacher and vowed never to work with someone under the age of 16 ever again." Naruto snickered in satisfaction. As far as he was concerned, Hideto-sensei deserved everything he got and more. "That's not funny, Naruto." Uruka chided with an unhappy frown. "Just because you don't like someone doesn't give you an excuse to make their lives miserable. I would think you of all people would understand that sentiment." Uruka's words sobered Naruto immediately. That was a low blow. It wasn't fair to compare Hideto-sensei to Naruto like that. Naruto never did anything to make everyone hate him so much. Unlike Hideto-sensei who definitely deserved it. It all started in the summer before Naruto's third year of the academy. The blonde had been eagerly waiting to attend the academy for the full day and was celebrating never having to go back to the civilian school ever again. But then he heard some bad news from Uruka-sensei. His favorite Chunin would no longer be his teacher. Apparently people had begun to notice how close Uruka and Naruto were and didn't like what they saw. They claimed that having Uruka teaching Naruto's class would invite favoritism towards the blonde and would be unfair to the other students. Even though the other students could attest to the fact that Uruka was fair to everybody, and if anything was a little tougher to Naruto than anyone else while in the classroom. Even when Uruka defended his after-school tutoring for Naruto as a service that he'd be more than willing to provide for any other student, they didn't believe him. Especially after the Uchiha massacre, since the Chunin was apparently wasting time and effort on Naruto which should have been spent on the last Uchiha, making sure the dark-haired boy was provided all the support and resources he needed. In Uruka's defense, the Chunin did try and reach out to the sullen child, but Sasuke rebuffed any and all attempts, preferring to be alone. Recognizing that the boy needed space, Uruka let him be with the knowledge that the Chunin was there if he needed anything. Therefore it was a less enthusiastic than usual Naruto that started his third year at the academy. Uruka-sensei made Naruto promise to behave and to give the new teacher a chance. He even made Naruto promise not to pull a prank for a full month. The first week wasn't even over before Naruto decided he didn't like the new teacher one bit. Hideto-sensei was just as bad, if not worse than the civilian school teacher Naruto had had. He taught Naruto the wrong information, like the wrong way to punch, fall and lay a trap. He ignored any of his questions, gave him very bad marks saying that he would never become a ninja and was just a jerk. What made him worse than the civilian teacher was that for one, these were skills Naruto would have to depend on for his life and the instructor was purposely sabotaging him, and secondly, although the civilian teacher was unfair to Naruto, she treated the other students all the same. This teacher had his favorite, Sasuke, the one he hated, Naruto, and the rest were just there. He only took the standard amount of time in front of the class to tell them what they were doing, then spent the rest of his time coaching Sasuke one-on-one much to everyone's disgust. Even Sasuke's who'd rather be left alone. Denied from pulling pranks, at least for a while, Naruto was soon skipping classes. The good news was that he wasn't the only one and formed a tentative friendship with a group of boys that usually skipped with him. Inuzuka Kiba, and his dog Akamaru, Nara Shikamaru and Akamichi Choji. And after his no pranks promise expired, he was even able to rope them into helping him with a few. So even though Naruto didn't get much of an education at the academy, the school year wasn't a waste. He made a few tentative friends, he still practiced what he knew and things he wanted to try out on his own. The Sandame and Uruka-sensei were happy to teach him every now and then on ninja skills. Harry still taught him about math and science, which was more advanced in his world than Naruto's, and he was way ahead of his year in stealth and traps thanks to his pranks and skipping lessons. Naruto didn't realize how hard it would be to prank and sneak away from the Chunin sensei versus the civilian teacher. Though Naruto's pranks were always inconvenient and annoying, they were never harmful or debilitating. Something that always saved him from harsher punishments, not that Naruto would do any dangerous pranks in the first place. He had a sense of humor, unlike some people. And even though he did get a sense of justice from his pranks, he never did it purely for revenge or spitefulness. But apparently some people just can't deal with pranks. Hideto-sensei, who was a newly appointed Chunin despite being in his late 30s, had decided to become an academy teacher to get used to his rank before taking on C or B ranked missions. But apparently he just wasn't cut out for the stressful position since he had little to no class control and he became increasingly paranoid the longer the school year lasted, and the more often he was pranked. He kept it together until the end of the year, when Naruto, being the thoughtful boy that he was, decided to have an end of the school year celebration by outdoing anything he'd done before. Naruto also did it since he needed a little pick-me-up from failing the Genin exam. He knew it wasn't the best idea to take the exam 2 years before the rest of his classmates opted to take it, but he wasn't learning anything in school anyways and wanted to fulfill his dream of being the strongest ninja of the village as soon as possible. Nowhere on the school grounds was safe. The doorknobs were covered in Vaseline, the coffee saturated with salt, pens and pencils set to explode ink or break with the slightest provocation. The training grounds were rigged like nothing else. Most of the academy teachers and Junin that were there to test any passing academy graduate, even those that didn't like Naruto, appreciated the skill and effort put into the traps and used the pranks as part of their end-of-the-year test. They did what they already had planned for their students. With points deducted for every trap of Naruto's they fell for, many would-be Genins cursed the name Uzumaki Naruto after that day since not one of them passed their Junin's test and blamed Naruto's pranks for their failure. This last MAGA prank was the straw that broke the camel's back. Hideto Sensei reached his breaking point and left screaming for the Hokage's office and never came back. Most of the students agreed that that meant they had the rest of the day off, which was why Naruto was at Ichikaru's celebrating the end of another school year. I didn't mean to make Hideto Sensei break down. Naruto said, I just wanted to have an end-of-the-year celebration. It's not my fault he doesn't know how to take a joke. He sulked. Uruka sighed, knowing that Naruto was right. He wouldn't have purposely done anything malicious no matter how much Hideto deserved it. Anyo Uruka, does this mean you'll be our sensei again next year? Naruto asked with hope in his eyes. I doubt it, but it is a possibility. I'll let you know when I find out, okay? Naruto agreed to those terms and dug into another bowl of ramen, courtesy of Uruka of course. Though Uruka would never actively encourage Naruto in his troublemaking, there was no doubt that the Chunin was impressed with Naruto's work and not a little prideful that he accomplished all that with no damning evidence that he was behind it other than his reputation. But even if he would never say out loud how he felt about it, there was nothing wrong with treating Naruto out to some ramen right after a masterfully pulled prank. Or at least, that's what he told himself. The sound of mail falling through the slot in the front door was easily heard over the noise of chewing and cutlery scraping against dishes. Dudley, go fetch the mail. Vernon Dursley commanded. Make the freak get it. His son whined in complaint. Boy, get the mail. Make Dudley get it. Harry whined back, hoping that his uncle was paying too much attention to the newspaper to process what was being said and by whom. No such luck. Boy, I said get the mail. Oh well, it was worth the try, Harry thought as he walked towards the front door, effortlessly avoiding Dudley's smelting stick on the way. He browsed through the mail as he slowly ambled back to the kitchen, since he had nothing better to do. Bill. A postcard from Aunt Marge, ew. She shouldn't have worn that bathing suit. Flyer, another bill, what the hell? Among the usual mail was a letter made of thick parchment and written with green ink, addressed to Harry Potter, smallest bedroom, number 4 Privet Drive, Surrey, England. Harry was confused, curious and more than a little creeped out. He hid the letter under his oversized shirt for further perusal and handed the rest of the mail to his uncle. As his uncle sorted through the rest of the mail, Harry went to his room to get his backpack, the strange letter still hidden inside his shirt. He put the letter in his bag along with some notebooks and the books he needed to return to the library. He went downstairs to pack himself enough food to last the rest of the day before saying a short goodbye to his aunt. Not that she cared where he was going, just so she'd know he wouldn't be available to do chores that day. Ever since Harry had learned about his special abilities and therefore figured out why his relatives hated him so much, they've come to a sort of understanding. Basically it was a live and let live scenario where Harry and the Dursleys tried to avoid each other and only interacted if they had no other choice, except Dudley, who still tried to carry on with Harry hunting even if it rarely, if ever, worked. Even though Harry still had to do a large amount of the household chores and he was still wearing Dudley's hand-me-downs, Harry got Dudley's second bedroom instead of living in the cupboard under the stairs. He got as much food as he wanted. He didn't have to throw his marks at school and most importantly, he got to leave the house pretty much whenever he wanted. This last freedom was highly encouraged by the Dursleys who had given up trying to squash the magic out of him and instead tried to avoid him at all costs. Since then the local library had become Harry's home away from home, or rather his first home since he didn't consider his relative's house as his home. After so many years of hearing, "Don't ask questions, boy," and being strongly discouraged from beating Dudley at school, to have a place where he could sat his curiosity and learn all he wanted to know and more to his leisure was paradise. It was the only place besides the dreamscape where Harry felt truly relaxed and carefree. Once Harry settled into his usual spot, he pulled out the mysterious letter and opened it, never guessing that the contents would be as life-changing as it would turn out to be. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Anyo, Isn't witchcraft and wizardry the same thing? Naruto asked his brother. I think so. Maybe not though, I'll find out when I go to the school. Harry replied. After such an exciting day, Harry couldn't wait to tell Naruto about what happened. Naruto had barely finished describing everything that had happened to him that day before Harry took over. He told Naruto about the strange letter he got in the mail and what it said before giving the blonde a copy that the room provided. But don't you see what this means? There are more people like us in my world. Hogwarts must be like the Ninja Academy, and the only reason I didn't know about it was that I didn't live in the hidden village it's in. Harry exclaimed, excited that he too would go to a school to learn more about his abilities and meet others, from his own world, like him. But even though I live in a hidden village, civilians from outside still know about ninjas and stuff. You should have already heard about wizards before now. How else would they be hired? Naruto asked. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to find out when I go to school. Harry said. Yeah, you probably can't wait to go searching through their library. Naruto replied, his face scrunched in distaste. Even though Harry tried to pass on his love of books and learning onto Naruto, the blonde still hated the thought of libraries. Naruto was a hands-on learner, though truth be told, so was Harry. It's just that no one was really willing to teach him except Naruto. In his own world he only had books to depend on, and lost his interest and concentration easily when reading. And any time he went into the village library, he was kicked out for making too much noise, even if he was as silent as a mouse. So even though Naruto was just as curious and eager to learn as Harry, he rarely went searching for answers in books the way Harry did and instead tried to figure it out on his own or ignore the problem until later. What do they mean by, "We await your owl"? Naruto asked. I have no idea, Harry replied. After a few more minutes talking about the letter and magic, the boys decided to spar once again. Though this activity wasn't quite the same as it used to be, Naruto was improving in both strength and speed at a rate that Harry had no hope of comparing to. Though he was only a little slower than Naruto, his strength was no match. According to the blonde, Naruto was only slightly above average in physical abilities at school, except when it came to endurance, and Harry knew that he was the most fit in his school. Maybe their anatomy was different? After all, Naruto had a crush on a girl with naturally pink hair, and if that was possible, Harry figured the fact that people were naturally faster and stronger in Naruto's world was possible too. It had been almost a full week since Harry got the mysterious letter, and he still didn't know how to reply. He tried sending a letter with Hogwarts as the only address information, but needless to say it was returned to sender. And every day more letters from Hogwarts arrived in the mail for him. Harry thought it was silly that they just send more letters instead of telling him how to reply if they were worried about the lack of response. The problem was that a few days ago when a giant pile of Hogwarts letters came in the mail, and Uncle Vernon got to it before Harry could hide them. Since then Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia have been acting crazy, muttering about how they were being watched and that those freaks had no right to harass them as they were clearly doing. Harry took to spending even more time than usual, if that was even possible, at the library to avoid the madness. Ever since then, the problem had gone out of hand. Vernon nailed shut the mail slot hoping to deter the wizards. But the letters still somehow arrived in the house. Like the time they found letters inside of Petunia's eggs. Something that Harry thought was both cruel and unusual. And today, a maelstrom of letters was literally exploding out from the fireplace. Harry wondered why he even bothered coming back to the Dursley household at all. Never mind the fact that the library is closed during the night, as he quickly grabbed his bag and ran out the front door for the library before he was blamed for the mess. But once he was outside, he saw where the never-ending letters came from. A flock of owls would swoop down and drop the familiar-looking letters down the chimney before flying away, allowing another flock with letters to take their place. Apparently wizards use owls to deliver mail. So that's what they meant by, "We await your owl," Harry thought. "Oi, you there," Harry yelled to an owl, feeling a little ridiculous. But sure enough, one of the owls that had just finished dropping its letter flew over and landed right by him. I don't suppose you could take a letter for me to Hogwarts?" Harry asked. The owl hooted, which to Harry sounded like a yes. "Alright then, hold on a sec." Harry ripped out a piece of paper from his notebook and grabbed a pen before writing his reply. Once he was finished he folded the letter and tied it around the owl's leg with a spare elastic. Thanks," Harry said, unsure if the owl understood him or not. It seemed that it did, since the owl immediately took flight and was soon a speck in the sky. Harry meanwhile continued his trek to the library. Minerva McGonagall continued to sort through replies from the first-year half-bloods and purebloods. Every year an average of 35 students were invited to Hogwarts. Of those, only around 8 had no wizard relatives, and therefore had no knowledge at all of the wizarding world. The November before they're due to start Hogwarts, and when most start applying for their Muggle middle school, Minerva visits each Muggle-born and their family to tell them about Hogwarts and magic in general. At first they all think it's a hoax or something, until Minerva turns herself into a cat or does something as equally impossible by Muggle standards. Then they are willing to hear a bit more, but are still leery of leaving their child in a world they had just heard of. Minerva will leave them to think, but will give them a means to contact her, or one of her associates, to learn more about magic in Hogwarts. Over the next few months she, Phileas and Pomona, it's best for everybody if Severus isn't involved, will answer any questions and make themselves available for tours of Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade. Usually by the time the pure-bloods and half-bloods get their letters all the Muggle-borns have already agreed to attend Hogwarts. Those with magical parents don't get their letter until the beginning of summer, since they already knew it was coming and therefore already know whether they will accept or not. They have until the end of July to decide for sure. That's when the teachers will know how many new students are coming, and therefore what the classes and schedules will be like for the coming year. This is also when the upper years get their letters with their book and supply lists. Thank you for the invitation, but we must decline. Minerva read and sighed as she crossed off Maria Radcliffe's name from the registrar. Though the great majority of children invited to attend Hogwarts usually accepted, every now and then someone declined. The Radcliffes were renowned for their abilities in potions, and lesser abilities in runes, but were next to useless at any other type of magic. Families like that tended to homeschool their children, so they could spend more time in their specialty and waste less time on subjects they're no good at. Minerva personally felt it was better to have a well-rounded education even if you were only good at 1 or 2 subjects. The cat Animagus picked up the next letter in surprise. It was written on Muggle paper and with a pen instead of a quill. Obviously a half-blood then. To whomever this concerns. Yes, I would like to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. But, where do you buy the supplies needed? Assuming that there is some sort of magical shop, of course. And where is Hogwarts? How much does the tuition cost? Is there a scholarship I can apply for if I don't have the funds needed? Signed, Harry Potter. P.S. Can you stop sending me all those letters, please? If you wanted me to reply earlier, you should have just told an owl to wait around for me to send a letter back with it. Minerva reread the reply. That wasn't right. How could Harry not know the answers to those questions? She distinctly remembered Lily's sister being there when she answered all those questions about the wizarding world and took the Evans shopping in Diagon Alley. Albus needed to see the letter. In no time at all she found herself in front of the headmaster, automatically declining the sweet Albus offered her. Albus, I was led to believe that even though Harry Potter would live in the Muggle world, that he'd have full knowledge of the wizarding world and his heritage. Albus looked up in surprise. Of course. He's living with his aunt who, as you know, has full knowledge of such things and therefore will tell young Harry. The bearded man replied. Then how do you explain this letter I received? Minerva asked, giving Harry's letter to the headmaster. Albus' eyebrows rose as he read. By the looks of things Harry probably hadn't even known that magic existed, let alone all the things about magic and the magical he should have known. Oh dear, it appears as though Mr. Potter has the knowledge of a Muggle born about magic. Would you be able to stop by his residence any time soon to teach him all he needs to know? I'm afraid not, Minerva said with regret. I still haven't chosen this year's Gryffindor prefects. Tomorrow I'm spending the day with Mr. Boot and his family to answer some more questions, and this weekend I already promised to take Miss Granger and her family shopping. Albus thought about the rest of his staff. Phileas was away at a dueling camp that he volunteered at. Pomona was working on a dangerous plant and wouldn't be free until the end of August, when the plant's gestation period was over. Severus was ensuring that the hospital wing was fully stocked and everyone else was away. Except Hagrid, of course. No worries, Minerva, I'll have everything taken care of. Harry washed his plate and put it in the strainer to air dry. It was Saturday, which meant that the library closed early, so he wanted to make sure that he got there as soon as possible. He wanted to go through some more anatomy books to see if he could find any trace of the chakra coils and chakra pool that's written in the books from Naruto's world. So far he had only found diagrams of muscles, nerves and organs, but no chakra system. Suddenly there was a knock to the door so loud and powerful, Harry thought the door would break down. What in the... Who the hell would try to break down an honest man's door at this time in the morning? Vernon yelled. Boy, find out what in the world's going on. Harry reluctantly made his way to the door. He looked out the eye-hole but wasn't able to see anything. When he did open the door, it was to find the largest man he'd ever seen in his life. He was easily 9 feet tall and 3 feet wide. He had a scruffy appearance. Harry realized that it was the man's beard which didn't allow him to see anything out of the eye-hole, but his eyes were kind and gentle. Hello, you must be Ari. I haven't seen you since you was a baby. You've grown quite a bit, I'd say. Harry didn't know how to respond to this stranger, or the situation in general. The giant man laughed. Nah, I don't reckon that you'd haven't remembered me. Anyway, I'm here on Hogwarts business. I'm here to take you shopping for your school supplies. After a lot of ranting and raving on the Dursleys' part, and Dudley gaining a pigtail, Harry was making his way through London with Hagrid towards the mysterious magical shopping center. Though Harry was dying to ask questions, Hagrid said it was best to wait until they were at Diagon Alley where he could speak without being overheard by Muggles, which are apparently non-magical people. Harry thought back to what he learned from the argument between the Dursleys and Hagrid. Apparently his parents were also wizards, something that wasn't really a shock to Harry since he'd guessed as much based on the way that the Dursleys called them no-good freaks and such, if they even talked about his parents at all. And if Harry read between the lines, or looked underneath the underneath as Naruto would say, his aunt had actually been jealous of his mother. Harry didn't know whether to be incredulous that his aunt hated him and his deceased mother so much because she couldn't let go of her spite, or feel sorry for his aunt for being unable to live her life without letting go of all those negative emotions. And another thing, his aunt had mentioned that his parents had gone and gotten themselves blown up, when he'd been told that they had died in a car crash. The fact that they lied about his parents' death didn't surprise him in the least, but he had stayed quiet hoping she'd reveal more information. Unfortunately she didn't, but Harry hoped he could find out what he wanted to know in the magical world. One thing Harry could tell about being a wizard was that it was nothing like being a ninja. Hagrid's size alone made people stop and stare as they noticed him, and the fact that Hagrid would stop to point at perfectly normal sights like parking meters and exclaim how odd Muggles were for living without magic. Well, let's just say that Hagrid was no master of blending in. If all wizards were even half as obvious as Hagrid, then ninjas and wizards were two completely different things. They stopped walking in front of a dingy bar with a sign proclaiming it to be the Leaky Cauldron. It was here that Harry felt somewhat more comfortable, since the disguise was more akin to a ninja and he felt that maybe wizards weren't that different. Not only would such a dirty-looking place throw off anyone who was looking for the gateway to a popular magical shopping center, though the name should be changed to have no magical connotations, but the genjutsu appeared to be top-notch. The people on the street would look at the bookstore on one side and their eyes would smoothly slide over the pub to look at the record store on the other side as if the pub wasn't even there. Harry wondered how they were able to target the illusion to only Muggles. After a quick chat with Tom the bartender, which somehow ended up with Harry shaking the hand of every single patron in the bar, Hagrid led Harry to the back alley behind the pub. Why did all those people know who I was? And why did they want to shake my hand? Harry asked his guide. The preteen was rather upset. He liked to be on the sidelines observing rather than in the spotlight. Almost his whole childhood was spent trying to be unobtrusive and fade in the background. He already didn't like the fact that he was entering a society he knew nothing about, but the fact that all these people knew who he was and he had no idea why bothered him a lot more than he was willing to admit. After learning that he had special powers and how his relatives knew about it and hated him for it, all without telling him about it. Well, let's just say that Harry hates it when things are kept from him, especially if it concerns him. Blimey, I forgot you wouldn't know about that either. I don't know if I'm the best person to tell y'all about that, but you can hardly go to Hogwarts not knowing. I suppose we'll talk after all your school things are taken care of. Though Harry was upset that he wouldn't have his answers right away, he was willing to wait for the promised chat. Now let's see, which one was it again? Hagrid mumbled to himself as he stared at the wall. 3 bricks up and 2 to the left of the garbage can, answered a crisp, no-nonsense voice. Hagrid and Harry spun around to see a group of 4 who had just stepped out from the leaky cauldron. There was a girl around Harry's age with bushy brown hair and slightly bucked teeth, a man and woman in their 30s that were obviously the girl's parents, and a stern-looking woman who had just spoken. Professor McGonagall. Harry, meet Professor McGonagall, she'll be your transfiguration teacher. Professor, this here'd be Harry Potter. I was just going to give him the tour of Diagon Alley and help him shop for his school supplies. Hagrid said. And this is Rubeus Hagrid, Hogwarts groundskeeper. Professor McGonagall said, speaking to the Grangers before turning back to Hagrid and Harry. With me are Greg and Marie Granger and their daughter Hermione, who will be starting her first year of Hogwarts like you, Mr. Potter. The group walked together along Diagon Alley towards Gringotts. The Grangers had to exchange pounds for galleons and Harry had to collect money from the vault that Hagrid had said was left to him. As they walked, Hermione's parents, who had taken a liking to the soft-hearted half-giant, asked questions about Hogwarts and the magical world in general. Minerva silently walked alongside them, only speaking to add a comment or two to Hagrid's answers. Meanwhile, Hermione approached the wide-eyed and openly gaping Harry, hoping to make her first-ever friend. Hi, are you Muggle-born too? I was so shocked when Professor McGonagall came to my house to tell me that I'm a witch. I mean, yes, some strange things have happened over the years, but I always assumed that they were coincidences. I can't wait to learn more. What house do you think you'll be in? I'm rather hoping for Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall is the head of Gryffindor, did you know? And Albus Dumbledore, the school's headmaster and the strongest wizard of the age, was supposedly a Gryffindor as well. But I suppose if I were to be in Ravenclaw instead it wouldn't be too bad. Harry just looked at the girl flabbergasted. She had said all that in one breath, a feat Harry wasn't even sure Naruto was capable of. And most of what she said went over his head. He had no idea what she was talking about. Before he could stammer out some sort of response, Professor McGonagall came to his rescue. I'm afraid that Mr. Potter is a little behind on his knowledge of the magical world. She begun, gaining the attention of the whole group. He is a rather unique case. As you know, Hogwarts usually sends a representative to Muggle-born students months before they're due to attend. This way they have time to learn about, and familiarize themselves with the magical world. Those that already have a magical heritage, however, do not get these visits. They receive a standard acceptance letter since close to 100% has a parent who had already attended Hogwarts and therefore they already know everything they need to know before starting school. Harry's parents were magical. I had taught both of them at Hogwarts. But they had died when he was still very young and he was sent to live with his aunt who was a Muggle. Since his aunt had full knowledge of the magical world and Harry's abilities, it was assumed that he would have the same knowledge as other children raised in the magical world, and was only sent the standard acceptance letter. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as we have just found out his relatives had decided to keep his magical heritage a secret from him. Hermione felt bad for her blunder. She was just trying to be friendly and now she probably made him feel bad about not knowing what she was talking about. But at the same time she was happy that she obviously wasn't going to be the farthest behind at Hogwarts despite being a Muggle born. When they first entered the majestic ivory building of Gringotts, Harry was awed. Hagrid's and McGonagall's words as they guided the group was haphazardly listened to as Harry took in the solid marble floor, the dark mahogany counters and the huge old-fashioned crystal chandeliers. Harry wasn't too fond of the bankers though. Truthfully, the goblins were a little creepy and looked like they would be happier attacking you than helping you with your monetary questions and issues. The Grangers went to line up at a desk off to the side, while Hagrid and McGonagall accompanied Harry towards one of the many counters where a goblin was working. But Harry was quickly left alone when McGonagall ordered, told Hagrid that they needed to talk after Hagrid pulled out a letter telling the goblin that he had come to pick up, you know what, involved. You know which. Hagrid gave Harry a small golden key before going to have his chat with the stern teacher. After talking with a goblin at one of the counters, Harry was led to his vault. The ride in the cart was exhilarating and Harry could have sworn he had seen a dragon on one of the sharp turns. Once Harry got over his shock about how much gold there was in his account, he asked the accompanying goblin about the value of the golden galleon, the silver sickle and the bronze canute, and how much the items in his school list generally cost. He filled the pouch Griphook, the goblin who accompanied him to his vault, provided according to how much he thought he'd need, and a bit extra to buy some more books or something. Once he was finished, Griphook led him back to the bank's lobby. As Harry looked around for Hagrid's massive form, he was approached by Professor McGonagall and the Grangers. "Hagrid was needed for Hogwarts business, so you will be accompanying us to do your shopping," McGonagall explained. Harry wordlessly complied, and together the Grangers, McGonagall and Harry left to spend the rest of the day shopping for supplies. Shopping was way better than Harry assumed it would be. Since they already knew what they needed to get, it was a fairly quick and painless experience with next to no time wasted on browsing or window shopping. Granted, they still weren't done, but so far the only places they spent an unusually long amount of time at were the bookstore and the Quidditch supply store. When Harry saw the broomsticks proudly displayed by the window, he couldn't help but exclaim his shock at the fact that yes, witches actually do fly on brooms. While this comment baffled McGonagall, the Grangers shared a knowing smile and chuckle. This in turn led to a discussion on Quidditch, the sport of choice in the wizarding world. Harry was definitely interested in trying it. Who wouldn't want to play a sport that involved flying at high speeds? His interest increased when he noticed the obvious pride and enthusiasm in the professor's voice as McGonagall talked about the Gryffindor team and how talented Harry's father used to be when he had played. Before then, Harry never would have pegged McGonagall for a sports enthusiast. When Hermione asked why first years weren't allowed to bring their own brooms, McGonagall explained that even though almost every witch and wizard knew how to fly, not everybody was good at it. No one was allowed to bring their own broom and or fly without supervision until the Hogwarts flying instructor deemed them worthy. Even though this rule applied to all years, it was only mentioned in the first year's letters since the older students knew the rules and it was easier to deal with those needing to get their brooms sent to them than those who have to send it back home and or keep it locked up. Flourish and Blots, Diagon Alley's bookstore, took up more than half the total time of the entire shopping trip. Hermione had been thrilled when she found out that Harry was a fellow bookworm. Though they had gotten along throughout the entire trip, the bookstore was where they had begun to really bond and form a true friendship. The adults eventually convinced the children that it would be no use buying the entire bookstore. Hogwarts had the finest magical library in all of England and they could always come back to buy books later. They settled on buying 4 extra books each, other than the mandatory textbooks already on their school list. It was an unspoken agreement between Harry and Hermione that they would be allowed to borrow and read the other person's books once they were at Hogwarts. After much deliberation, Hermione got Hogwarts: A History, Understanding Potions, The Greatest Witches and Wizards of the Century, and The Merits of Transfiguration. She opted for those books since Transfiguration and Potions were the subjects that interested her the most, and she felt that it was important to know the history and important facts of the magical world and Hogwarts. Harry got Curses and Counter Curses, Bewitch Your Friends and Befuddle Your Enemies with the Latest Revenges, Hair Loss, Jelly Legs, Tongue Tying, and much, much more. The only reason he bought it was because Naruto would have killed him if he didn't. Not because he was interested himself. Honest. Great wizarding events of the 20th century. He agreed with Hermione that it was important to know some basic facts and history of the wizarding world. The Healer's Basic Guide to Healing. A rather redundant title in Harry's opinion, but he wanted to know if wizards had a similar magical system to the Chakra system in Naruto's world, and Quidditch Through the Ages. Finally they were done at the bookstore and only had one item left, their wands. Harry was both excited and apprehensive about getting his wand. On one hand, this is what will make him a wizard and allow him to do magic according to all the legends and stories. On the other hand, no one in Naruto's world used wands and Harry had been able to cope this long without it. Assuming of course that chakra and magic were the same thing. The group of 5 made their way into Ollivander's. The shop was empty and rather dusty. The bell above the door rang as the door opened and closed, so the group waited for someone to come to the counter. Harry and Hermione were a mass of nerves, so it was really no surprise that they jumped, and in Hermione's case, screamed, when Ollivander appeared out of nowhere. Harry mentally berated himself. He should know better than to be unaware of his surroundings. Though to be fair, the adults were just as surprised. "Ah, Mr. Potter, I had been expecting you." I remember your parents coming in for their first wands like it was yesterday. Your mother's was 10 1/4 inches, willow, nice and swishy. Nice wand for charms work. Your father on the other hand favored a pliable mahogany 11 inches, excellent for transfiguration. Well, your father didn't so much favor the wand as the wand favored him. The wand chooses the wizard you know. Ollivander said. He then turned his attention to Hernian. I don't recognize your face, Muggle-born I wager. Excellent. Muggle-borns are always such a challenge since I never know where their strengths lay. Who would like to go first? Harry silently indicated that Hermione could go ahead of him, and the girl was quick to take him up on the offer. She scurried over to the lone stool as Ollivander left to grab one of the many boxes piled high in the shelves. Mr. Ollivander, Hermione said as a magical measuring tape started working on her, moving on its own and measuring every little thing, like the space between her nostrils. How that would help her find her wand, Harry wasn't sure. How are you able to tell when a wand suits, or chooses, the wizard? I mean, shouldn't all wands work for all witches and wizards? Wand lore is a complex and mysterious branch of magic. Ollivander replied, the first thing you must understand is that magic is just like any other gift. Even though there are many magic users doesn't mean they all have the same abilities. There are many types of magic after all. Hermione thought over what he just said. So, even if two people are magically strong doesn't mean their magic is similar. So it's like singing. Just because two people are excellent singers doesn't mean they're both altos? Precisely. There are many branches in magic, and being good in one doesn't guarantee being any good at the others. Everybody's magic is different, and therefore everybody's wand should be different too. Each wand is made to harmonize with, focus and to some degree, amplify, the user's magic and therefore provide the best results of any given spell. So even though you could use a wand that isn't well suited, it would still work but not half as well. The closer the match, the better the results. But how can you tell when it's a match? Or is it even possible to match every person to their ideal wand? And how can you tell what's in what box? Hermione asked as she gave the first wand a wave. Indeed, the store had tons of bookcases. All behind the counter of course. Each with at least 6 shelves and all covered in identical boxes. If Harry had to guess the number of boxes, or rather wands, in the shop, it would have to be at least over 1,000. In every wand there are 3 main variables, Ollivander explained, snatching away the wand and presenting Hermione with another one. Wood type, wand size and most importantly, the core. How I organize the shop is as follows. In each bookcase is a specific type of wood. On the top row of each bookcase, wands containing phoenix feather cores are stored. The second row has wands with unicorn hairs as their cores, and so on. The wands on each shelf are also organized by length, the shortest to the left and longest to the right. With so many possibilities for wands, it is true that it would be impossible to match each customer with their ideal wand, but I am still able to find compatible matches. As I had said earlier, it is easier to match up purebloods with their wands. Family members tend to share similar magical traits, therefore I already know where to start looking for their perfect wand. For example, Potters in general are rather suited to transfiguration and defense against the dark arts. Therefore, when it is Mr. Potter's turn to get a wand I will begin over there, with some stronger woods like mahogany, teak and oak and try dragon heartstring cores. In fact, many families forego buying new wands for their children and just reuse wands from deceased family members. Even though it's possible that the wand will be well suited to the child, it's no guarantee, and it's best to get tested for your wand. After all, young Mr. Potter may have taken after his mother in magic, in which case the wands suited to an ancient Potter wouldn't suit him. Finally, one of the wands reacted to Hermione, shooting out a shower of blue and gold sparks. McGonagall gave Hermione a warm smile while her parents jumped in shock and then started clapping. Yes, bravo. A fine wand indeed, 9 3/4 inch vine wood with a dragon heartstring core. Rather powerful, but good with fine details, suited for transfiguration. Bravo. Hermione happily jumped off the stool, giddy about getting her wand. Is that how you know that the wand is suited towards you? It shoots sparks? Hermione asked as Harry took her place on the stool. Yes. All the other wands that gave no, or minimal, reaction would still work for you if you tried hard enough, but the spells would only have a fraction of the power as any that you use with that wand. Ollivander answered as he wrote down Hermione's wand's details before packing up her wand and handing it to her. Can I ask a question? Harry interrupted. What is the point of the measuring tape? Harry asked, indicating the magical measuring tape that was now seeing how long his shins were. You mean besides keeping my clients occupied as I gather wands for them to try out? Ollivander asked. Yeah, Harry replied. Nothing. There was a moment of silence as the shop's patrons processed that information. Even McGonagall hadn't known that Ollivander just used the measuring tape as a means of distraction. Oh, well, I have another question. Are wands even necessary? I mean, haven't we been doing magic without wands this whole time? Harry asked as Ollivander gave him his first wand to try out, and just as quickly snatched it back. You must be referring to the accidental magic that you had performed, correct? Ollivander questioned. Harry nodded as yet another wand was grabbed from his hand and replaced with a new one. Yes, it's true that wandless magic is possible, but it's neither reliable nor strong. The only reason you've been able to do it before was because you were so young. I don't think I'm wrong in assuming that you haven't performed any accidental magic recently. Children by nature have short attention spans, but once something has garnered their attention, they will be fixed on that object to the exclusion of all others. For example, let's say there is an object that is out of reach. Should the child want it, it will focus in on that object, ignoring everything else, which will in turn cause their magic to be directed at that object, and therefore the child will perform wandless magic. Maybe the child will even get angry or frustrated, strengthening the magic more since our magic always responds to our emotions. Now let's say an adult wanted the same out-of-reach object. Because their mind is more matured and developed, they can have multiple thoughts at once, so instead of just focusing on the object and wishing it was in their hand, they would think through various ways to get the object, and the pros and cons of each method. It is too trying for adults to be so focused on one single thing, thus making wandless magic very difficult. You need a wand to focus your magic, or the spells will be so weak and sloppy that you might as well not have cast it at all. Harry frowned at that. All the jutsus he knew were rather powerful, and they don't need wands. But then again, he didn't really know any spells or curses yet. Maybe they really were more powerful than the jutsus. Mr. Ollivander, Hermione asked, how do wands work? I mean, surely we can do some magic without them? Way back when, magic users didn't use wands, but they still needed ways to focus and direct their magic. We still use some of those methods today, like with runes and potions. But for spells, they used incantations and hand movements to focus and direct magic to produce a specific result. But it took way more magic and time to produce the same effect wandless which it did with a wand. And many spells need too much power and focus to perform at all without a wand. With wands, you won't need to use half as much magic for a spell since not only are you using some of the magic from the wand core, but wands also focus and direct the magic so you waste less magic as well. After years of practice, and if the spell is simple enough, you will be able to cast spells silently and or with no wand movements. And yes, even without a wand, but then you might have to use the wand movements and incantations. But as I had said earlier, the results will be far weaker and more widespread, further weakening the spell. The average wizard can only perform an average of 3 spells wandless, reliably. Harry mused over Ollivander's explanation as he tried out more and more wands. The way he described the wand movements and incantations sounded a lot like how you perform jutsus, saying the name of the jutsu and going through the hand seals focuses and directs your chakra for a specific result. But why should it matter if you have a wand in your hand or not? Either way you're using the hand movements and incantation to focus and direct the magic. Meanwhile, Ollivander was still talking. How a wand works is as follows. When you prepare for a spell, you subconsciously gather the magic needed. The wand movements will draw the magic to the wand, where the magic from the core of the wand will mix with your own magic, stabilizing the spell and slightly amplifying it. The wood provides a place for the magic to mix without sabotaging it and will ensure that the magic only leaves in the direction you wish it go. Before wands, it took far longer to perform any magic due to the time needed in rituals and potions. Wands changed the way we perform magic. As the pile of tried and rejected wands piled even higher, Harry took this opportunity to try and make sense of everything he had just learned about magic and compare it to everything Naruto had told him about chakra as he waved yet another wand. He knew that chakra had two types of energy, physical and spiritual. Physical energy was something everything had, it's basically your life force. Spiritual energy, however, is what is stored in your chakra pool until it is called upon for jutsus and then is taken to the chakra coils to be mixed with the physical energy to create the chakra needed for the jutsu. So wands must be like a shortcut. Instead of first gathering the spiritual energy, then throughout the hand seals needed in jutsu name, which acts like an incantation, mixing the two energies to the proper levels, and then directing it. Wands pull on the spiritual wizard's spiritual energy, bypassing the wizard's physical energy to mix with the wand's physical energy at the proper levels and then focuses and directs it at a level that a ninja can't hope to accomplish, especially in the midst of a battle. One thing was for sure, he and Naruto would be busy in the foreseeable future learning more about the theory of magic and chakra. But why use dragons and unicorns? Aren't wizards technically magical creatures too? Harry asked. If his assumptions were correct, then it would explain why so many witches and wizards he had seen today were seemingly out of shape. Shinobi put as much time and effort, if not more so, training their bodies as training their chakra. Naruto had said that they were taught that relying solely on jutsus in battle was foolishness, since they take up so much time, effort and energy. Most ninjas only have enough time and energy to use around 5 jutsus in any given battle. The rest is taijutsu and weapons. But because wizards have wands, and therefore only use a fraction of the energy for a spell that a ninja would use for a jutsu of the same power, wizards don't have to depend on their bodies because their magic is good enough, lasting for the whole fight and then some. And because muggles rely on technology instead of their bodies as well, it makes sense that Naruto is so much faster and stronger than Harry. It's natural selection that people in Naruto's world only have kids with those strong enough and fast enough to survive being a ninja, or living in a ninja-rich society, long enough to get married. Technically, yes, a hair from a witch or wizard would be able to work as a wand core, but it would be so weak it's not worth making. We are magical, but we have nothing on phoenixes or unicorns, who are almost made of pure magic. Ollivander answered. Harry just guessed that humans don't have as much physical energy as those creatures. Just then the wand he was holding gave out a few sparks. Oh, you did it, Harry, Hermione exclaimed. I think not. Ollivander countered as he yanked away the wand and replaced it with another. Harry stared dumbfounded at what happened until Ollivander snapped him out of his stupor with a sharp, well, go on, give it a wave. Hermione, confused about the last few minutes, sought Ollivander for clarification. Mr. Ollivander, why did you say that the wand wasn't a match for Harry? It gave out sparks. Yes, but only about 7 sparks. Ollivander explained, as he gave Harry yet another wand to try. As I've already said, that some wands are more suited than others. The more sparks, the better the match. I refuse to let someone buy a wand unless they had at least 25 sparks on first contact, though I prefer to get 50 sparks or more. More time passed as Harry tried more and more wands. At this rate, his arm was going to fall off. When he tried to apologize for taking so long, Ollivander waved him off. The wand maker said that finding a suitable wand for him was the best challenge he'd had in years, and his and Hermione's interest in wand theory made their visit even more enjoyable. Ollivander returned carrying another box. Even though Harry had long since lost count of what number wand this would be, he paused before he took it. Something in the way that Ollivander held the box as he carried it over and the way he seemed a little too intense and focused on what the result was made Harry realize that this wand, for whatever reason, wasn't a normal wand. When he grabbed it, he felt warm sensation go through his body and a waterfall of yellow, silver and red sparks flew out the end of the wand. McGonagall smiled and the Grangers applauded as Harry finally found a compatible wand. But Harry's eyes were trained on Ollivander's reaction. Curious, most curious. Ollivander muttered, his face set in a pensive frown. What's curious? Harry asked, a bit more sharply than he intended. He hated it when things were kept from him, and he had a feeling that Ollivander had already known what the result would be when Harry grabbed the wand. He wanted to know why Ollivander thought the wand would suit him and what was so great about the wand. Ollivander looked up from his thoughts at Harry's question, fixing the brunette with an unblinking stare. It is most curious, Mr. Potter, that you should be destined for this wand, when it was its brother that gave you that scar. Ollivander said, gesturing towards the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead. Huh? McGonagall, who had been in a state of shock after hearing that Harry got you-know-who's brother wand, snapped out of it after realizing that Harry had no idea what Ollivander was talking about. Even the wand maker, who was usually unflappable, seemed taken aback at the fact that the boy who lived didn't know his own history. "Mr. Potter, please tell me you know how you got your scar. How your parents died, why you are famous." The Grangers were looking distinctly uncomfortable, not really knowing what was going on but knowing it was very important. Harry just looked at McGonagall curiously. He had always assumed that his scar and his parents' death were linked, just as he assumed that the Dursleys lied about what really happened. But just because he knew they didn't die in a car crash didn't mean he had any idea of what really happened. And Hagrid was supposed to explain the whole fame thing after they went shopping for his school supplies. McGonagall looked ready to burst. She took a deep breath and cooled down, but that seemed to almost make it worse. Now instead of a big explosion, it was like a simmering burn. Even Ollivander quailed under the force of her rage. "Are you telling me that not only did your relatives neglect to tell you of your heritage, your inheritance and your gifts, but they also didn't see fit to let you know how your parents died? How they faced the greatest Dark Lord of the century and died as heroes?" McGonagall asked, clearly trying to control her anger since the Dursleys were presently nowhere in sight. Harry just nodded as McGonagall's lips thinned even more, if that was even possible. She gave a stiff nod before turning towards the Grangers. "I realized that you had invited me over for tea after this excursion to talk more about Hogwarts and magic in general, but I must decline. It seems that I need to accompany Mr. Potter home and have a chat with his relatives." No one tried to argue with her. It was a silent but restless group that made their way back towards the leaky cauldron. McGonagall was preoccupied by thoughts of the Dursleys and what she was going to do to them when they meet. Harry was both anxious and excited for the upcoming confrontation, and the Grangers were dying to know the full story, but were too tactful to ask, though it took some unsubtle hints by her parents for Hermione to keep her mouth shut. Unfortunately, the day wasn't quite over yet. No sooner had the group entered the pub than they were assaulted from people and flashing lights from all sides. "Mr. Potter, after so many years in the Muggle world, how? Rumored that you in fact had just found out that you inherited the Four Founders' vaults in Gringotts. Adopted by the Minister of Magic and trained in battle tactics." The pub was crawling with reporters and photographers. When McGonagall said he was famous, he didn't think she meant this. And they were yelling the weirdest things. Who cares what his favorite ice cream flavor was? And he didn't even know what a Graffern was, so how could he have been secretly raised by them in the wild? And there were so many camera flashes, Harry was sure that he was going to go blind. Harry was quickly separated from his companions as the reporters descended on him, grabbing him, yelling out and snapping pictures. Unfortunately for them, they picked a bad time to impose. "What do you think you're doing?" The crowd parted as Professor McGonagall pushed her way through to her charge, glaring at anyone who dared get in her way. "You all come in here," yelling and pushing and screaming. "You're acting like a bunch of barbarians, attacking a poor boy. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. I certainly know you haven't acted this immaturely at Hogwarts, I wouldn't have allowed it. Instead of acting like the calm, reasonable adults you are supposed to be, you take over Tom's fine establishment, pushing out its customers and those wishing to go from the wizarding world to the Muggle one, and for what? So you can ambush an unexpecting child. You didn't even have the decency to make sure that his school supplies, which he spent all day shopping for, weren't damaged as you mauled him and tore him from his companions. I have half a mind to turn you all into pigs. That way you'll have better manners." The journalists quailed under the force of the professor's wrath, many having flashbacks from their days at Hogwarts. McGonagall continued to tear into the scared and sheepish reporters as a few began picking up Harry's scattered supplies and handing them back to the shocked preteen. It seems as though Harry's first impression of McGonagall was right. She was definitely someone you did not want to piss off. Feeling that the journalists were properly chastised, McGonagall turned back to Harry. "If any of your supplies are damaged or missing, let me know. I'm sure that the nice people here would be more than happy to reimburse you," she said, shooting a stern glare around the room for those that would even think of contradicting her. Finally, the Grangers, Harry and Professor McGonagall found themselves in Muggle London with all their supplies all in one piece. They said a quick farewell to the still shell-shocked family as Harry and McGonagall made their way to the underground. "Come along, Harry. You wouldn't want to keep your relatives waiting, would you?" the professor asked with a sly smile. Harry responded with a smile of his own before picking up his pace. Now this was a meeting he just had to see.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.